Hi, everyone. My name is Leah Swanberg, and I am the host today for this fantastic webinar. I truly hope that you get from it all that we are putting down. Today, I will be speaking first. I will be representing Egg Helpers and Canadian Fertility Consulting. We are Canada's largest surrogacy program and Canada's largest egg donor program. We've been in operation for 17 years, and our goal is to help intended parents throughout the world build families through surrogacy and egg donation. After my introduction to CFC and Egg Helpers, Dr. Sharma from the Create Fertility Center will be joining me. She will be talking about IVF considerations when selecting an egg donor, considerations when selecting a surrogate, and she will be up for questions. So please save your questions for her. She is a fantastic doctor who we have worked with for many years and have celebrated many successes with. Following Dr. Sharma, we will have Jan Silverman, who is a fertility therapist who has been in this field honestly since its inception in Canada over 25 years. She has been available to intended parents, surrogates, and donors, ensuring that as people enter this process that is so beautiful and so sacred, that they are considering not only the process of IVF or the process of egg donation, the process of surrogacy, but the process and the agreements that they'll make with themselves, as well as the people they partner with through this process. So Jan will be after Dr. Sharma. And again, get your questions ready. She has seen it all and has been involved in thousands of cases with us and with other agencies, and will be able to answer all of your questions around the process. After that, we are going to have Rachel West from Carbert Waite. She is a lawyer located in Alberta, or in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and she is a bilingual French-English speaker who has shared this journey with, I'm going to say, thousands of intended parents who are building their families, as well as done an amazing job advocating and representing gestational carriers and egg donors through the process, having been on both sides of the so vital legal agreements, and having built amazing relationships with lawyers around the globe. She will be able to give you great insight into the legal process here in Canada, changes to the law in Quebec, if you are looking at surrogates in Quebec, as well as she'll be able to give you some advice on how to find a lawyer in your jurisdiction, so where you live, who will be able to support you when you are considering surrogacy in Canada. Then closing it up, this is my favorite part, and the part that if you can only watch a piece of this, it is the most important piece. It is a surrogate and her intended parents who are going to share their journey and going to share how they were able to navigate through IVF, losses, pregnancy, birth, maintaining a connection post-birth. It really will be, I believe, the highlight of the webinar, to hear from people who have experienced this process firsthand and how they were able to navigate it with a, I think, 16-hour time difference. Sarah's in Toronto and her intended mom's in Australia. So whatever that time difference is, it didn't matter. They didn't skip a beat. They developed a deep, wonderful relationship that continues on now. And I want to say their journey was 5 years ago, but Sarah will and Rachel will correct me if I'm wrong when they come on. So again, thank you very much. I'm going to give people a few minutes just to join. Grab a notepad if you are planning to take notes, and know that this will be sent to you as a recording after we are done this webinar. We are, depending on where you are in Canada or around the world, this message will be, at your time, depending on your availability. Okay. Let's just give people another moment. Excellent. So as I said, my name is Leah Swanberg. I'm the founder of Canadian Fertility Consulting and Egg Helpers. When you are embarking on getting curious about surrogacy, I really want to encourage you that the first place to begin, the first place to start is, with yourself, whether you are partnered or an individual, is to really look at the journey ahead of you and look at who you need in that journey. And so we know from doing many of these journeys that you will need a lawyer, most certainly. And so that's a lawyer in your community, as well as a lawyer in Canada. The lawyer in your jurisdiction or your community won't be able to draft your surrogacy agreement. That will need to be drafted in Canada in accordance with the Assisted Human Reproduction Act, which is the federal legislation for surrogacy and egg donation. So if you don't know of a lawyer where you live, connecting with a lawyer in Canada first, and working backwards, they will be able to refer you to someone where you live to really begin understanding what you need to know. And when I talk about that, people say, well, shouldn't we get the surrogate? Shouldn't we get the egg donor? Shouldn't we get the clinic? And I really want to caution you that whether you find a great surrogate, a great egg donor, and a great fertility clinic, if legally you are unable to be named the parents of this child that is created by the great egg donor, surrogate, and clinic, then it doesn't matter. And with that information, the lawyer is first. Once you've spoken to a lawyer to ascertain the bits and pieces that you need. So I know from experience that there are many countries in the world that require you to work with a known egg donor or an egg donor who is willing to provide identifying information when your child reaches the age of majority. What I also know is that in some places, your surrogate's marital status matters. And why that's important is when you get to the surrogate selection process, you will know based on the conversation you had way back when with your lawyer, what it is you're looking for in terms of a surrogate who is married, single, unmarried, separated. All of those terms mean something very different in each country, including Canada. And so having that information right off the bat will help you, and it will help the agency that you work with find exactly who you are looking for. So you've spoken to the lawyer, you know what you're looking for, you reach out to us or another agency and you say, hey, I'm ready. So we will often send you away and say, okay, especially with our same-sex male clients, we will say, go talk to your doctor. If it's possible, get a semen analysis. Let's make sure you can participate in the building of your family before you start spending money. And many of our clients have already done that. They've sort of done the homework. They saw this webinar last year. But if you haven't, that is where I would send you first. And if you are a heterosexual couple and the fertility issue is unknown, or you have MRKH, absence of uterus, and you haven't checked your hormonal level or hormone levels in terms of your ovaries and egg production, we're going to send you to do that as well. If you don't have a place to do that because you live in a country where surrogacy may not be accepted, or you're not comfortable speaking to your physician about that, many clients come to Canada. They book a flight, they come here, they do the semen analysis, they leave a sample. And for women, they do some initial testing and travel home. And so having that information ahead of time is really important as you move to the next stage. The next stage is, in our case, is Egg Helpers, and so at Egg Helpers, you will meet an amazing team. You will likely come in contact with Scott Swanberg, same name. This is a family business. You will likely or possibly speak to Christina, who is my daughter, who supports our donors. And it really just depends on who your case coordinator is, but there are many people at Egg Helpers set to help you. When you were looking at donor profiles, and Aaliyah, if you could pull up the donor profile, that would be fantastic. Um, this profile looks a little funny because it is when it's on our website, which is how you will view donor profiles, it looks quite different. I wanted to just sort of pull the raw data. So as you're looking at donor profiles, because you'll be granted a password and the ability to search our database of hundreds of amazing Canadian donors, 80% of them are willing to be known, and or and many of them say if the intent, there's a question, which I'm going to get to in a moment to highlight for you. But there's a question that says, if the intended parents prefer to have an anonymous donor, would you be comfortable with that? Those two questions are really important depending upon where you live. Now, if it says anonymous and this is the donor you have to have, or she looks like your sister and she's lovely, and please reach out to Egg Helpers and say, here's our situation. The country we live in requires, would this donor be willing to? Yes, no, okay, to be able to move forward with the donor. So in the donor's profile, you're going to see on page 1 some photos. You're going to see her age. You're going to see where she's located. You're going to see health information. Aaliyah, if you can just sort of keep clicking through these pages. You're going to see her marital status. You're going to see information if she's been pregnant before. You're going to have all kinds of information about this donor. So if you keep clicking to page 9, on page 8, you're going to see her education, if she, traits and characteristics. For many people, they want to feel, and my suggestion is when you review a donor's profile, that you feel comfortable, that you feel that this person is, or could be part of your family. And that may be that she lists that her hobbies are playing board games. It may be that her, you know, her hair and eye color are similar to yours, or she's in social work school and you're a social worker. But on page 9, up the top, you'll see, um, we ask, are people supportive of this? And, we hope that people say yes. And there are definitely some cultural pieces around that. There are some donors who are very public about their donations and some that are a little bit more private. And while they have the support of their spouse or partner, they may not have a lot of outside support. And then from there, what kind of relationship would you like with the intended parents? And when you hear Jan Silverman in a few speakers, it will be really important to listen to the research and the information around anonymity, and egg donation and what the research is saying. Okay, we can close that one, Aaliyah. Excellent, thank you. So you've reviewed the profile, you've selected the donor. And when you select a donor, it's really important to know with Egg Helpers, and I imagine with all donor programs, that the donor you select has either been a donor before, and that will be identified to you through the agency, Egg Helpers or otherwise. And if not, that she has been medically screened and approved to donate to you. What's important is that you have spoken to a clinic. So you may have been, to the clinic first, as I suggested. And upon the semen analysis, upon your medical consultation with Dr. Sharma or another doctor, the clinic will suggest to you different packages, different clinical packages. And we have seen this large uptick in trend to um, guaranteed programs. So clinics saying, you know what, we are going to guarantee some success here. We are going to, guarantee that you have a baby, and you are going to pay X number of dollars for that. And so we want to make sure at Egg Helpers or at any agency that the donor you select meets the clinic's criteria for the package that you've selected. So some people will pick a donor and then pick a package based on the donor they've selected. Some people will speak to the clinic first and then pick based on that. And it really is an individual decision. Some people want to select the donor and then select a clinic based on the donor's location. Other people want to pick the clinic based on the clinic's success rate and ease of travel for them and have the donor travel. So those are all considerations to talk to your donor agency and to talk to your fertility clinic about. So as you are sort of in this early stage, lawyer, clinic, egg donor agency, interchangeably, once you have semen analysis and your own hormone level testing, if you are going to need an egg donor. So from there, you've selected your donor. We often I'm going to leave Egg Helpers there. Is there any questions about the egg donor selection process before I move on to the surrogacy process? You can put your questions into the chat or into the comments. I'd be more than happy to answer those now for you. I'll just give people another moment if anyone has a question. Okay, on to surrogacy. So many intended parents want to wait until they have embryos stored. So that is the egg donor will go through the egg retrieval phase. The eggs will be retrieved. The embryos will be created with your sperm or the sperm of a donor. And then they are frozen. And Dr. Sharma will talk about that, but those embryos can be frozen. We have seen in the news recently that embryos stored 20 years ago are creating children today. And so we know that they can be frozen for a long time. So embryos are frozen. And now it's time to look for a surrogate. So we have Canada's largest surrogacy program. I myself have been a surrogate twice and found it to be such a rewarding experience. And what I will tell you is that surrogates in Canada surrogates anywhere are amazing. So whether you are pursuing surrogacy in Canada, considering surrogacy in Mexico, or elsewhere, it is about the surrogate. And finding the right surrogate means finding the right agency. Sometimes you find the agency first, and in Canada, agencies don't charge for matching. So there is typically an administrative fee of anywhere from $750, which is our fee, up to, I believe, $5,000 for that initial starting point. The agency is going to ask you and share with you. So they're going to share with you the process in Canada in terms of reimbursement of expenses versus payment of a fee to your surrogate. They're going to talk about timeline. We say that intended parents typically will wait 6 to 9 months. So sometimes intended parents who are not superstitious, which is tricky for many of us, will begin to look for an egg donor and a surrogate at the same time. Others want to have the embryos frozen, and then we'll move on to move on to surrogate selection and wait the 6-9 months. But again, really an individual decision. So we will share with you the financial considerations. We will talk about the cost of legal fees as we have known them to be. We will talk about your surrogate's expenses. We will talk about what I call immovable values. And Aaliyah, if you could pull up the profile for me so I can share that. Okay, so This is just one of our surrogate profiles. And what's really important to view, so on page 1, she's going to talk about, you know, her envisioning her surrogacy. And so that piece is really, and most agencies have something similar. That's where you're really going to know, is she looking for a more professional relationship? Is she looking for a deep friendship and commitment? If you could move to the um, next slide. We're going to find out where she lives. We're going to find out really important relationship information. Is she married? Is she single? Is she separated? If you are in a jurisdiction where that matters, that is important to look at as you begin to receive profiles. And I wanted to go over this because you're going to have a consultation with a case specialist, and then you're going to wait and wait, and every day may feel like a year. And we're going to send you profiles. You're going to review the profile and you're going to let us know, yes, I would love to speak with, I think this particular Amanda. So in this case, I'd like to speak to Amanda. Your profile is then sent to Amanda, and Amanda would select you, or she would not select you and she would select someone else. And so most intended parents, will just say yes to many surrogates that meet their criteria. And we hope that the match comes quickly, but we know that the general wait time is 6 to 9 months. When we look at her health and medical history, it's going to list her pregnancies, it's going to list her weight, which, if it is important for you to meet BMI or body mass index criteria for your clinic, you can enter her height and weight into a BMI calculator and have that information, or you can forward it to your clinician for further information. What is also important to know is, prior to a surrogate's profile being sent to you, we have had that profile vetted along with often her birth records or other information that the clinic is requesting. We will have that information previously, and wouldn't be sending it to you, her profile to you, if she wouldn't meet your clinical criteria. Here's the obstetrical history or obstetric history, which talks about her pregnancies, her deliveries. What's really important here to note is, will future pregnancies be monitored by family doctor, obstetrician, or midwife? Many people outside of Canada, and many people inside of Canada who haven't experienced pregnancy aren't sure about midwifery care. They don't really maybe know so much about it. So that would be something definitely to talk to your case specialist about if you're unsure. In this obstetric history, you will also hear about the surrogate's birth plan. Does she have her children at a hospital, at a birth center, at home? Something really, really important to highlight. Next slide, Aaliyah. Okay, next slide. More on her kids. This is important here, childcare and housekeeping. It's really important to know what it would cost to keep this family going should she be on bed rest. We know that 10% of women in our program end up on bed rest. When we talk about bed rest, we're talking about 2 weeks or greater of time that she's unable to perform the typical duties of her life as a mom, which is often working, taking kids to school, cooking. All of those pieces are so important. And so while surrogates are not compensated in Canada, that is absolutely an expense that would be on your part. So when I'm talking to intended parents, although I don't do many case specializing anymore, I often say to intended parents, when they say to me, we would love a surrogate who's a nurse, like it would just be so great. And I'm like, okay, so, let's talk about the soft skills of a nurse: caring, kindness, putting on a band-aid. Yes, a nurse is lovely, and her lost wages could be $2,000 a week. Oh, okay. So a stay-at-home mom who puts on the Band-Aids, who's kind and caring, maybe more within your budget. It is really important, as you are engaging in the process, to ask the questions, all of the what ifs. What could happen if? To ensure that at the end of the journey, you are pleasantly surprised rather than punched in the face. And this next page here, employment and wage loss, lends well to that. Next page. Oh, that's the last page. Thank you. There used to be another page with more photos and more information. Some surrogates really want to delve into their reason for becoming a surrogate. And many people ask us that, well, why does someone want to be a surrogate? And I think that it is a very individual answer. And I don't think it matters whether a surrogate is being paid in the US or volunteering in Canada for expenses. It doesn't matter. And the reason it doesn't matter is that what is a good reason to be a surrogate? What would satisfy your curiosity? And many intended parents will say things to me like, well, I'm really great. Like, I just hope a surrogate can get who I am so that she can pick me or they can pick me. And I want to tell you something. We do not want to set a surrogate up for selecting you as the person she is doing this for. We want to set this up as her. She's made an agreement with herself to show up in this beautiful way, to be a part of this sacred journey. She has connected with an agency to ensure that she has life insurance, that she has a mechanism to receive reimbursements for her expenses, which we have an app that we invested greatly in financially to ensure that all of our surrogates' receipts are reimbursed in a timely fashion and that you have access to that information, and that Health Canada required document each month is signed stating that these were expenses and not payment. Surrogates need that. If they go into this for you and they don't get pregnant, which happens from time to time due to compatibility, due to, science and magic, we don't know. But if it doesn't work, then who is she as a person? Our goal at CFC is to honor the women that show up as surrogates and to care for them and to help them care for themselves so that if a miscarriage occurs, if an unsuccessful transfer occurs, if the match breaks and they need to match with other intended parents, that they have the resiliency and the skills in order to manage the ebbs and flows of this process. And if they have all of their hopes here with you and it doesn't work, then you haven't delivered. We don't want to put an intended parent in that position. We want to ensure that we also empower you with the information to make the best decisions you can with the information that you have us to manage the details so that you are able to insulate your relationship with your surrogate so deeply and so tightly that it is based on pregnancy information, relationship building, and not built on anything other than a mutual trust and understanding. I want to go back. I just realized, and I know I'm almost at 30 minutes, so I'm going to go quickly. Aaliyah, I know you're timekeeping. One thing that I didn't discuss as an immovable value, because I just jumped into the profile. One thing that's really important as an immovable value is termination views. And, often we have intended parents come in and they go, yeah, well, we don't really know, and we're not sure, and we'd like to talk to a surrogate. It is impossible for us to share your story with a surrogate. And we're going to ask you to make a video. We're going to ask you to create a biography. We are going to invite you to create a lookbook. We want to make sure that we are sharing you in the most beautiful way. And whether you have had, losses, whether you have had adoptions fall through, whatever history you come to this process with, I want to tell you that the key is we have gone through and we still have hope. I spent a lot of time with intended parents who are grieving. And I used to think that grief was grief and that you needed to stay there. And I think there is something to that, and Jan will talk about that, I'm sure. I now know that I can grieve and be hopeful. I can grieve that I, as an intended mom, am not pregnant and be excited that my surrogate is. And with that is the agreements you make with yourself, the agreements you make with your partner around boundary setting with your surrogate. When it's with your egg donor, if it's you're both going to look at egg donor, you're both going to log into the website and select your favorites and put them into your favorite section and see what matches, because looking at it together just brings up some things you're not comfortable looking at. Um, but one thing is, as you're making those agreements with yourself and setting those clear boundaries, one of them that is so important is, how do I feel around termination? How do we feel about termination? What do we know about embryo creation? What do we know about PGTA testing? What do we know about chromosomal abnormalities versus physical abnormalities caught later in pregnancy? It is important that you have made that agreement with yourselves so that you can convey that in your biography, so that you can ensure you and your surrogate or potential surrogate share that value. Many of our surrogates will say, yes, leave it to the intended parents, terminate or not. And we also have some surrogates with religious views or personal views that say, you know what, I am not comfortable terminating a pregnancy post 12 weeks, or I'm not comfortable terminating a pregnancy at all. And so, with that being said, it's really important that you know where you are on that so that you can select a surrogate based on where they are at with that. And it is just something that is so important. And I really want to encourage people to begin to think about, what are your termination values and beliefs prior to even beginning to look at surrogates. So I apologize for sort of going to the end and going back to that. I do, however, want to answer questions before we move on. Peter, great question. So, it really depends on your fertility clinic. Some fertility clinics are really interested in genetic testing of egg donors and the compatibility with intended parents. We all do have some mutations that may not matter unless the donor has the same mutation, and then it matters. And again, many donors who have previously donated, that genetic panel has already been done. And then you, as intended parents, could do that when you select the donor. And I mean, in terms of family medical history, you will have all of that on her donor profile. And then, depending on whether your clinic suggests or requires genetic screening, then that would be done by your clinic. And if your clinic doesn't require that because they feel PGTA testing of your embryos is enough, then they will let you know that at that time. So it really is a clinic specific. However, sometimes intended parents say, my clinic suggests this, and I'd like to do that. And we support that as well. This is your journey. You're taking yourself with you. And if genetic information is important for you, then that is important to me as well. I will say that we find people who participate in known donations really sort of have a bit more insight, information on the donor. And through the legal agreement that you have with your egg donor and the legal agreement that you have with your surrogate, many of these details are there. And I would say with the egg donor, she is swearing to, and Rachel will talk about this, but she is swearing to the fact that what she put in her profile is what is absolutely correct about her family health history from her understanding. I mean, listen, she may list 5 aunts, not knowing that 4 of them were adopted. Or she might list 1 aunt, not knowing that her grandparents placed children for adoption. There are definitely pieces there. The one thing I will say is that through 23andMe and Ancestry and all of these sort of DNA companies, it is really difficult to have an anonymous donor these days. And I know for myself, having been a donor sort of starting back 20 years ago, I have become aware that anonymous donations may not always stay that way. So, but great question. Definitely something to connect with the clinic you're working with on. And if you don't have a clinic, we're gonna sort of hope that after Dr. Sharma speaks, you'll be excited to potentially have her as your doctor. Um, provide sperm. Oh, Justin, what I would say most of our same sex male couples do is they have an egg donor and they split the eggs. So, say there are 20 eggs. They take 10 eggs here and 10 eggs here. And the fertility clinic will inseminate half of the eggs with one dad's semen and the other half with the other. And then the clinic will simply select the best quality embryo, or you can suggest to the clinic which dad will go first if you're planning on having more than one kid, which we find most people are. But definitely once you have that testing done, I think that's really important to sort of see, like, we've had many clients who have no reason to believe that they wouldn't be able to participate in the genetic creation of the embryos, only to find out that they weren't able to based on this testing. So, absolutely fantastic question, and I'm sure Dr. Sharma will address it. And we will move on to Dr. Sharma. Aaliyah, if you want to bring Dr. Sharma on screen, that'd be great. Hi, Dr. Sharma. Thank you for hanging in there with me for the last few minutes.
No
So,
problem.
welcome. I am so grateful for you to be a part of this webinar. I will allow you to introduce yourself, and I'm hoping that during your time with us, you can speak about the egg donor and surrogacy process, maybe how to select a donor, how to select a surrogate, and sort of what you do at the clinic. And I'm going to pop off screen and pop on at the end of your talk to field any questions from the audience. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me to participate. Third party reproduction has really become near and dear to my heart as I've sort of entered into the middle portion of my practice. So I've been doing this for quite some time. And I think we are very lucky at the clinic that I'm at Create to have great relationships with agencies like yours and have a great support team and physicians and all these ancillary services that allows us to practice just really good medicine and achieve high success rates when it comes to third party reproduction. So in terms of my background, I'm Prati Sharma. I'm a reproductive endocrinologist. I've been in practice for almost 15 years, believe it or not. I trained in the US at Cornell and Columbia universities, where I practiced really the breadth and depth of IVF, fertility treatment, assisted reproductive technology, third party reproduction. And then I met and married a Canadian, which is what brought me to Canada. And I started my practice here at Create Fertility Center, where really we do the whole spectrum of fertility treatment with a large focus on what we're talking about today, which is third party reproduction and helping those intended parents who require an egg donor and or surrogate. Um, and so I'm really grateful to have developed the relationship that we have with your agency, with Egg Helpers and CFC, and have been able to help numerous intended parents, all across my career and at our clinic. So, in answer to your question, how does a intended parent get to me? Well, there's really sort of many different avenues that an intended parent can eventually sort of come to me for using an egg donor or surrogate. And so, probably the first way is that they're already in my practice and it's potentially a woman who has tried with her own eggs and maybe it hasn't worked out, or she's over a certain age, typically we say over 45, where egg quality declines. And because of that, she requires an egg donor. And so, naturally, as her physician, I will suggest that to her and we'll have that discussion about whether egg donation makes sense for their family. And then we'll go on and connect the patient to agencies to find an egg donor who'd be suitable. And then we'd run the cycle. The other way is through the agency like yourselves, where you guys get referrals all the time. You guys go do all of these outreach conferences in um, different countries as well as locally. And typically, candidates will come to you and say, my doctor said, because of my age or because I'm a same sex male couple, I require an egg donor and a surrogate. Could you connect me to a clinic? And that's where we get referrals from you guys saying, we know Create is a clinic that does a lot of third party reproduction. And I think you'd be a great fit for my clients. And could you help get their medical cycle lined up and get this moving? So that's the other way. And sometimes patients just reach out directly to us because they've heard that Create does a lot of third party reproduction, or we're in the media, or we're on Instagram, or just word of mouth. Patients tell their friends, like, I had my baby through surrogacy or egg donation with Dr. Sharma, and you should go talk to her. So there's really many different avenues, and no matter how you come to me, we offer the same great care, and our goal is to achieve a healthy, successful pregnancy. So you were talking about how the process of egg donation and surrogacy goes. So typically, what happens is an intended parent, whether they're same-sex couples or hetero couples, they will meet with me in consultation, and that's where I really get to know you and know what your reproductive goals are and where you've been to date and what your treatment to date has been, if any, what the results of any diagnostic tests have been, and if you've been in touch with any agencies to talk about finding an egg donor and or a surrogate. And then from there, depending on if it's a same-sex couple, same-sex male couple, we know that in order to conceive, you need both an egg donor and a surrogate. If it's a hetero couple, typically it is an egg donor and or a surrogate as well, depending on your reproductive diagnosis. And so that's where I will understand the story and start by introducing you to our third party team here at Create. Um, and that's where you'll find out about the financial process. How much does it cost? Because really the finances are just as important as the medical piece. And, it's a highly, highly successful process, but it's also an expensive process. So we need to make sure it aligns with your financial goals. And so our financial counselors are excellent. They'll meet with you, they'll speak to you about the various packages and how you can pay for this, and how the pricing will roll out. You have a counseling appointment with one of our great social workers. One of them will be speaking today, Jen Silberman, who's amazing and has been doing this for a very long time, to talk about what it means to have a child that's from an egg donor or carried by a surrogate. And those counseling sessions are required, but they're also incredibly helpful when it comes to sort of talking to your future children about the way they were, created. And, you know, our goal is transparency. I mean, every intended parent gets to make their own choice about how much they'll tell their family or their child sort of where they came from. But there's lots of data surrounding when you should tell a child that he or she was conceived through egg donation or carried through surrogacy. And that's where our counselors are really helpful. So, counseling, finances, and our team will introduce intended parents to various agencies. Obviously, we work with CFC and Egg Helpers a lot, and the agencies will help shortlist and send profiles of egg donors and surrogates for our intended parents to match with. My role is to look after the medical treatment of the intended parent if she is carrying, the intended parent if they're giving sperm, whether it's one or two men, to look at the uterus if they're going to be carrying the pregnancy, and to look at all the genetic markers that you sort of touched upon, and to talk about genetic testing of embryos, and really to run the cycle. I always say that the egg donor, the surrogate, and the intended parent are equally my patients. So my goal is to take care of all three parties like they're my own patients. And so I really look to make sure the experience is wonderful for all three of them, and to make sure that we're doing this in the safest and the most medically appropriate manner to allow the intended parents to have the highest degree of success, but also for the surrogate and the egg donor to go through this process safely, um, and to have a good experience. And so ultimately, if an intended parent requires an egg donor, once they match with an egg donor who fits their wish list, as I say, then that egg donor is screened by our clinic. And we have a pretty strict medical list of what the egg donor needs to do. And this list is curated based on research and what's done all over the world and what the science shows. But basically, we want to make sure that the egg donor is medically appropriate to donate her eggs. And so by that I mean we look at her ovarian reserve. We want to make sure she has a good cohort of eggs, and we study those eggs by looking at her ultrasound and her egg count on ultrasound, looking at a blood test called the AMH fertility test, and her age. And so generally we say the appropriate age for an egg donor to donate her eggs is between the ages of 18 and 32. We push the envelope a little bit to 32, 33, 34, especially for specific ethnic groups where egg donors are not very common. And certainly if they have good ovarian reserve, there's not a huge difference between a 33-year-old and a 28-year-old if they both have good egg quality. So age, ovarian reserve testing, they undergo STD testing, psychological evaluation, urine toxicology screening. I'm a proponent of genetic screening with expanded carrier testing because I think genetics are really the wave of the future. And if there's anything you can do to mitigate risk to your children, I think it's always worth it. So our clinic is probably more on the pro side of doing the carrier screening on intended parents as well as egg donors. But again, yes, at this point, it's a choice. If intended parents say it's too expensive or we don't want to do it, then that's a personal choice. So all of that testing takes place, and then the donor is medically screened and is ready to go. And so I handle that IVF cycle where the egg donor is stimulated with injectable medications called gonadotropins, where we're stimulating the ovary to create 15 to 25, maybe 30 eggs. That's sort of the ideal amount, although some egg donors make more. Some egg donors hover around that 15 to 20. Really, the sweet spot is in that 20 to 25 eggs to get enough healthy, viable embryos to achieve one or two babies. And so I will see the patient, review their ultrasounds and blood works in that 2 week window where they're stimulating. I will do the egg retrieval where we extract the eggs from the egg donor. It's a quick 30-minute procedure that's considered highly safe. The eggs are given to the laboratory to fertilize with the sperm source, whether it's two partners for a same sex couple or one partner for a hetero couple. Sometimes it's donor sperm for a single woman. We create embryos, and typically in our clinic, we do recommend genetic testing of the embryos, especially if a surrogate is used, because it really enhances the chances that your first transfer will work and avoids chromosomal errors that can lead to miscarriage, Down syndrome, or failed implantation. And so I'm also doing the embryo transfer, and this is where we talk about the surrogate or the intended parent who's carrying. So, in terms of screening the intended parent that's carrying or the surrogate, really we're concerned about the uterus, pregnancy and implantation history, history of successful outcomes with their prior pregnancies, general health, because we know that chronic medical issues can affect pregnancy, any medical issues that came up in pregnancy or any complications in pregnancy, and then all the typical stuff STD testing, counseling, urine toxicology screening, all of those are also important. I should also mention for both the egg donor and surrogate, we want to make sure that they're going to be able to complete the process. They are going to be able to take the medication. They'll follow up appropriately, particularly for the egg donor and even the surrogate. They're responsible for taking hormonal medication that's going to either support their egg growth or support the pregnancy. So we want to make sure that they're at that level, that they'll be able to understand the instructions well and be dedicated to doing things the proper way. And so with the surrogate or with the intended parent that's carrying, I will perform the embryo transfer. And an embryo transfer is again, a quick procedure that's typically under 10 minutes, not under sedation. We use a specialized catheter where an embryo is loaded up by the embryologist, and the catheter is placed into the uterus by myself under ultrasound guidance to make sure it's placed at the appropriate point in the uterus to allow for implantation. It's a pretty standard procedure. I probably do like 3 to 5 of these a day. And then we wait. Then we're in the 2 week window of waiting to see if the patient gets pregnant or not. So that's really in a nutshell my role as the doctor. Um, Once the cycle takes place and we have these embryos and we're deciding to go with transfer, my role is to be the medical sort of guru with this process. So I talk to the patients about their embryo quality. I talk to the patients about their PGTA results. We talk about what happens if there's a failed cycle or a miscarriage in the surrogate or the intended parent. What if there's not enough embryos and we have to do a second cycle? Is the surrogate or the egg donor a good candidate? I review profiles even before the egg donor or surrogate is screened to see if this would be an appropriate candidate to be screened. So anything medical typically comes to me and my nursing team. And, I really want to make myself available to intended parents and even the egg donor and surrogate because I understand this process can be incredibly emotional and nerve wracking. And so you want to be able to speak to your doctor about any questions that you have. I'm going to pause here for a second because I've talked for a little bit. I don't know if Leah, you're still online and you want to guide me in terms of what else you'd like me to specifically touch upon.
Absolutely. So I have some questions that have been sent my way. And the first question is, what advice would you give to people who um, are considering working with a family member who's an egg donor, maybe older than sort of the typical sort of uh, 19 to 28-year-old donor?
Yeah. So that's considered, known end donation. And it's tricky, right? Because that family bond and the genetic bond is huge. So I totally get it if a intended parent wants to use her sister's eggs because she wants to preserve the genetics and keep it in the family. And so I've done a number of these cycles. We just have to be really transparent about the fact that if you use your 42-year-old sister, the egg reserve will be what it will be. She may require more than one cycle, and her success rate is going to be lower than the average 28-year-old egg donor. So am I open to it? Absolutely. What I usually tell patients who want to use a older than typical egg donor is we review the IVF success rates at that age and I say let's do some ovarian reserve testing and screen your donor. I mean there are some limits. If a patient asks me to use their 46-year-old cousin, I'm not going to be in favor of that because we know fertility declines significantly over the age of 43. And so the outcomes are really poor at that level. But, within reason, 37 years old, 36 years old, 38-year-olds, and even if a patient feels very strongly about screening their 42-year-old sister, I will certainly do it and say, these are the odds.
Excellent. I have another question, and it is from intended parents in the UK. They'd like to know if they have embryos that they've created in the UK, and is it possible that they send them to you or, well, to the clinic and then have a surrogate in Canada?
100%. So I think this is a question I'm asked every day about the safety of transporting eggs and embryos. And we're just really in this amazing age of reproductive medicine where we've really perfected the ability to vitrify, which is freezing eggs and embryos. And they do really well moving around the world. I will certainly say embryos probably do a little better than eggs, but yes, embryos are constantly transferred all around the world. I mean, listen, the companies that we and all other clinics use to transport embryos across borders and, overseas are all excellent. They're very good and the risk of losing your embryos because of change in temperature or because I don't know the compartment in the airplane gets too hot and the embryos thaw. I mean the risks of that are under 5 if not under 2% because this is done all over the world. Certainly there's always some risk, but the stories are far and few between of anything adverse happening to embryos. So yes, in answer to your question, it's very possible to transport them and
And
use
I'd
them
like
very
to add
safely.
on that for the person who asked that we at CFC, and I would say most surrogacy agencies would suggest that you get your embryos to Canada, you have the embryologist unpack those embryos, make sure that they're safe, tucked away at the clinic, that that they're frozen here, and then move forward with the selection of a surrogate. Again, we have worked with so many superstitious people, and I may be one of them. And so we always suggest to have the consultation with Dr. Sharma, and talk about that. Get the embryos here. I also, before we end, I want to give these sort of top tips, and then Dr. Sharma, if you want to talk about them. The first one is if you have, oh, sorry, this other question just came up. Dr. Sharma, it says sex selection is not legal in Canada. Is that right?
That is correct. So that is one big difference between the United States and Canada, and quite frankly, even in the rest of the world. And it's an interesting philosophical and ethical question that we could probably sit here and debate all day long. And I actually tell my intended parents and all my patients, even patients using their own eggs and sperm, I don't necessarily have a personal feeling against it. So it's really not me or myself or the clinic, but the Assisted Human Reproduction Act in Canada, at least at present, prohibits gender selection outside of genetic disorders that are carried through a certain gender. And so, if there's a legitimate reason to do gender selection, say something like X-linked muscular dystrophy, then certainly we could advocate for that and do that in our clinic. But if it's purely for family balancing or desire, unfortunately, that is not allowed in Canada.
Excellent. Okay. Oh, Colleen had a question, and it's, is the egg donor journey, taking hormones, etc., hard on the body for many women? It is, and we prepare our donors. I myself have been a donor several times. My three daughters have been donors. Two of them work within our organization, as well as our intake team at Egg Helpers, and they really share their tips, their tricks. They talk a lot about how meaningful the process is, and we find that working with doctors like Dr. Sharma, who said, she's looking for 20 to 25 eggs, and she's looking at keeping the donor safe to ensure that she feels well throughout the process. We only work with clinics who have counselors within their programs so that if a donor is feeling unwell, she has somewhere to unpack that. Is it that she's feeling physically unwell? Is it that she's feeling anxious about the process because it is so huge? And so we want to make sure that, and it is why the donors are required to be in the clinic every day or sometimes every day to check in with the physician to make sure that they are within a healthy range in terms of their hormone levels and the egg quality and production, and making sure that they are medically within range, and safe throughout, safe throughout this process.
Yeah.
So,
If I
as,
could just comment
oh,
on that for
please do.
one second, like I will be the first one to say to any patient that's doing IVF, it's certainly not a complete walk in the park. And you can attest to this, Leah. Like, you're taking injections for 10 to 12 days, you're going to feel bloated, breast tenderness, nausea, you're undergoing an egg retrieval. But what I can say is that because of how far we've come in our stimulation protocols, even in my time doing this, the protocols have become so much more patient friendly.
Yes.
They used to be a month long, and you remember this, Leah, even when we started with Lupron and things like that. And now it's literally 10 days of stimulation, minimal risk of ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. You know, it's really much easier. So I think we have to identify the fact that yes, there will be some mild side effects, but the stimulation protocols are so good now that most patients really tolerate it super duper well.
Absolutely. And from 20 years ago, my first donation, to watching my children donate now, it is definitely different. And women are kept top of mind, or the donors, the surrogates, and really making sure that the education is there, and that, while you're having a consultation with, with the clinician, with Dr. Sharma, the donor is as well. And she's having the opportunity to ask her questions and to be educated on the process, to know what to look out for, and to ensure that she truly understands, from a medical process, from a legal perspective, what it is she's engaging in. And our goal at the agency and our job is to really support her. Many people, work with a known donor, so they're supporting her as well. But we want you to really just enjoy the relationship with your donor, and so we want to take that heavy lifting of offering support and encouragement, and organizing her travel and all of that to the clinic as well. Absolutely. So as we are ending, Dr. Sharma, I had one other question, and
Sure.
it was, are we possible to encourage the odd? Okay. This person is saying, is that also true for twins? Is it possible to encourage the odds of that happening? In general, it is more likely with IVF. Is that true? So they're just kind of asking about twins, and
Yeah,
have
multiples
they
and all that.
always, yeah.
Yeah, so this is also an age-old debate in fertility medicine, particularly when it comes to third party, because a lot of people want the 2-for-1 special. They say, put in 2 embryos, let me get twins. It's only one time that I have to be pregnant, or one time that the surrogate has to be pregnant. But now that we're doing so much PGTA, and even without PGTA, egg donor success rates, whether into a surrogate or your own uterus, are like the first transfer, if you do an elective single embryo transfer, is so good. It's like 70% success rate. The other issue is that if you put in a double embryo, if you put in 2 embryos, there is a risk of splitting to triplets. And so triplets are kind of like a deal breaker pregnancy, because whether it's a surrogate or your own uterus, those are much more complicated pregnancies, much higher risk of preterm labor if you take those pregnancies to term, really higher risk of NICU admission and that the babies could be quite sick. When it comes to third party, especially with intended parents that are international, it becomes very complicated with regards to if the babies are born prematurely and coming and staying in Canada. And it's also risky for the surrogate. So whether she carries twins or triplets, we have seen an increase in complications because multiples have an increased complication risk. And if that surrogate wants to go on to have her own children or do another journey, we don't want to put her at risk. All to say, the success rate of elective single embryo transfer is very high, and that's what we advocate for. That being said, if an intended parent and a surrogate, if they're extremely bent upon doing a double embryo transfer, and I would arguably say that when I talk about the risks and benefits to most intended parents and surrogates, they're pretty much on board about going with a single. But for those who are like hell bent upon doing a double, I mean, it's an open discussion, I will say, and we are flexible. It's not like a deal breaker, but I mean, our general dogma is for an elective single embryo transfer to keep all parties safe. And surrogates can have the baby and do another transfer fairly soon, and that's really the safest way to go.
Absolutely. And I'll add to that with insurance products available to intended parents outside of Canada, it's really important to understand that there are limited options for baby coverage for multiple pregnancies. And we do know, I will say that out of 300 and some odd pregnancies that we had last year, that we had 4 pregnancies that were twins, 2 who transferred 2 embryos. The intended mother was of an advanced maternal age, and they chose that route. And other 2 had embryos that split. And we supported and loved those journeys, and we care for everyone. And hospital bills are expensive. NICU stays in Canada are $15,000 per day per baby. And oftentimes, as I said, there are very limited insurance possibilities there. So Dr. Sharma, if you would have any last tips for intended parents or any information that you'd like
Yeah.
to give in the next last couple minutes, that would be great.
Sure. I mean, I think when you are approaching a complex cycle like third party with an egg donor and a surrogate and an intended parent, it's definitely more complex than doing a conventional IVF. So choose a clinic that is adept at this process. I mean, I'll put in a 3 cheers for Create, but there's many clinics who are very good at this, and choose a doctor that you're really going to be aligned with, you can reach when you need to, because it's hard. Like, I can imagine for me, everyone's on pins and needles when it comes to fertility and pregnancy care and infertility, especially if you've been on a journey in the past. And so if you're overseas and you have questions for your doctor and you can't reach them, and or you want to know about your embryos or what's happening with the surrogate's pregnancy scan, like, you want to have someone in your corner who's going to be available, even if it's for a quick phone call or an email to say, hey, yeah, we can chat about that, on Monday or whatever it is, because you want the journey to be pleasant. And I think what I always tell my clients and my patients is this is designed to be one of the most successful things we do in ART. You have a perfect uterus, a perfect egg donor, and hopefully decent sperm. And so this is really the highest success rate type of cycle we do, so it should really be a pleasant journey, and our goal is to make it as much that way as possible. And so keep an open conversation with your clinic and your doctor, and I'm happy to see any of you in consultation.
Excellent. So as you, if you are watching this with us live, if you're watching this in future, we will be sending out information from Create Fertility with Dr. Sharma's contacts so that you're able to book a consultation. Thank you so much, Dr. Sharma, for joining us. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Take care, and good luck with the rest of the webinar.
Thank
Take
you.
care, everyone.
As we wait for Jan to enter, Gareth, do most surrogates do multiple journeys with the same IPs? That is really, I would say 10, I don't know, because many intended parents choose to have one child. Some choose to have more and they have the same surrogate or they have another surrogate. That's a tricky one. It's a real individual question. Okay. I am so Oh, well, Rayanne is signing up. Reach out to her. Excellent. So it is great to have Jan on the screen. Jan is, I'm going to let Jan introduce herself. And she's going to share with you some considerations as you move forward with this process. And Jan will be back at the end to ask you some questions.
Okay, so hi, and it's always such an honor and a pleasure to get together with this group and talk about something that I've been passionate about for over 30 years, which is helping people to make a family. As one of those people, I'm an infertile woman from way back. As one of those people that struggled so hard with fertility issues, you learn how incredibly special it is to have a child. And you also learn, after a lot of tears and thinking, that you may not get the path that you originally thought you were going to be traveling, but how lucky you will be to have the child that you hope to have, that you will have eventually. So I have been a fertility counselor for over 30 years. And again, based on my own personal experience and recognizing many, many years ago when my hair wasn't gray, that there was very little support and very little education for people struggling with fertility issues. And that doesn't just mean heterosexual couples, that also means same sex couples. People do not understand fertility journeys. So I have a role to support and educate and counsel you around issues of fertility, reproductive health, and how to move from where you are right now, which is desperately wanting your family, to where you need to be, which is holding that baby in your arms. So, what goes into this? So, first of all, let's think a moment about expectations. Of course, for the women in the group, or women, yeah, you mostly expected that you would be able to have a baby, that your eggs would work, that your uterus would work, and that someday you would achieve a pregnancy with your own eggs and your own body. So often entering into reproductive technology means that, what? How could this be happening to me? Are you kidding? And we go through the, but I'm healthy, but I take care of myself. But. We can come up with all kinds of buts. And sometimes we have to go through the process until we realize that we're not necessarily going to travel the path we thought, but that the path is going to diverge one way or the other. And we have to give ourselves the time and space to get to that place. For our same sex couples, oh my God, how this has changed. So, of course, for our same sex men, there never was the expectation that you were going to be pregnant, for sure. But for many men, it's still this, I knew it existed, but I never really understood the process. I never knew what it was going to entail and what my part was going to be, and how were we actually going to operationalize this desire. And this is where so many of our roles come in. And I want to stress, as Dr. Sharma was just talking about, and as you know from Leah, who creates these seminars, that we work as teams because we understand that this is a challenging, difficult process, and that we all bring different dimensions into this to try and make this the best possible adventure as we possibly can, recognizing that as in any journey, as in any adventure, there are going to be bumps in the road. So, one of our goals is going to be, how do we help you to navigate these bumps? So, from a counseling perspective, it's twofold. So, first of all, one of my main functions, and I do lots of work with Create, one of our main functions is to do the required assessments of donors, of surrogates, and you guys too, of intended parents. For the intended parents, it tends to be less evaluative in nature. What we want to make sure is that you understand the challenges that are going to come up working with donors and surrogates. And we want to make sure that your eyes are open to what you are going to need to make this work as well as possible. And I want to help you navigate that path. I want to help you figure out how to make it work best for you. And for donors, it may mean helping you work through what is your criteria? What are you looking for? What's realistic? What's not realistic? How do you feel about open donations? What are your concerns? What are your fears? What are your apprehensions? What do your supports look like? Who's on your team? How can we, what suggestions can we give you about how to communicate? When we talk about gestational carriers or your surrogates, it's a little bit more complicated because working with a surrogate is about the establishment of a relationship. And everyone's relationship is a unique, special relationship. So my goal is to help you to walk into this with your eyes again open, and to help you figure out what do you need to be thinking about. So I have what I always talk about, and if you meet with me later, you're going to hear me say this again. I have my own three-legged stool about working well with gestational carriers. My three-legged stool includes number one, you have to find somebody that you feel that you can respect and respects you. Working with a surrogate is never one-sided. It's never all about what you want. It's never all about what she wants. It's about how do we join together, work together, respect what each side is talking about so that we can come up with good ways of working together. So that's my first leg. My second leg, I will admit, came from a surrogate who said, yeah, Jan, yeah, respect, yeah. It's more than respect. You have to work with a surrogate that you feel you can trust. You know, it is a very unique relationship when you are in one location. Whoops, off the screen. When you are in one location and your surrogate is in another location, which may be on the other side of the ocean, the other side of Canada, somewhere in the States, somewhere in Australia. We get people from all over the world. And here we are trying to create this most incredible, intimate relationship with somebody that we don't really know. And yet, this person is going to be doing the most unbelievable thing in the world. She is going to be helping you to make your family. So, on some level, you have to feel a sense of trust in her. You have to not micromanage as much as you want to because this is your baby, but you have to trust that she knows how to be pregnant. She knows how to take care of her body, and she knows how to take care of your baby. But lots has to be worked through and negotiated until we get to that point. And that's why, again, through CFC, there are so many levels in place to help you work through those different steps. And then my third part of the stool. So again, we have respect. That's five. Respect and trust. And then the third one is going to be communication. How are we going to communicate? I can't stress how important good communication is between yourselves and your gestational carriers or your surrogates. And you each have to figure out what's that going to mean for us. And for some people, it's going to be negotiating time differences. For some people, it's going to be negotiating different languages. And for some people, it's just going to try and be figuring out how in her busy schedule and how in my busy schedule, how are we going to make it work? And again, no pat answers because everyone is an individual and everyone brings their own wants and their own needs to the situation. And again, when the counseling staff meets with the donors and the surrogates, it tends to be evaluative in nature. We want to know that she fully understands her role and responsibilities, really understands that. But we also want to make sure that her head is on straight enough. And I say straight enough because all of us bring a few things with us. You know, the older we get, the more things we have on those shoulders. But it's also, what are those things? How do we deal with them? What are our supports? Who's out there cheering us along? So helping them to understand what their responsibilities are going to be, but helping you to understand that we all bring different things into a relationship. So another role of ours is to provide that evaluative assistance. And again, never a one part team. When we work together with the physicians. We all get a vote in the process. And again, important that you trust yourself and trust your ability to talk about what your issues and concerns are, but also important to be realistic and recognize that we're all human beings and we all have a few things in our lives. And before you jump in, Leah, I just want to add one more important thing that we do, and that especially, and I've worked with lots of agencies, but one thing that CFC is remarkable at is that they recognize the importance of ongoing support and counseling. And I
Yes.
cannot stress that enough. You know, they know that things come up, that there are issues and things that need to be discussed along the journey. And they have such an infra, inter, they have lots of supports in there, lots of different people working on that. And one thing they provide is ongoing accessibility to counseling services for surrogates, for donors, for anyone that just needs to talk through, not necessarily even about the donation. It's just, I can be talking with somebody about a life stressor, but we want to make sure that they feel cared about and supported by the team. Now, did you want to
Absolutely.
ask a question?
I have people are sending me questions for you. So the first one, and it's interesting. It's a question from an intended mom who says that while she's excited about surrogacy, she's also grieving her not being able to carry, and she'd love advice on how to fake it until she makes it, or if she should fake it at all.
Well, I think that's really interesting because one again, and I come from this from my own personal experience as an infertile woman. Um, I'm gonna say, and I say this as a freeing statement, and I made my family through adoption because I'm old enough that we did not have all the reproductive technologies that are now available. And how lucky you people are out there for that opportunity. But I always say that I don't think we ever really get over it. And I don't say that as a, oh my God. I say that to free you because sometimes I think we put up an expectation that, oh, someone else is going to carry the baby. I'm going to do this. I'm going to be fine. No, I don't know about you, but I wanted to be pregnant more than anything in the whole wide world. I really, really, really did. And it was a deep breath. But I think what I finally realized is even more than the pregnancy, I wanted to be a mom. Oh my God, I wanted to be a mom. So, what I'm trying to say is, I think acknowledging where you are at is a really, really important thing. I'm not a fan of pretending because it comes out eventually. But there are strategies. Talk about it. And if you can't talk about, lots of gestational carriers love keeping journals or things for the intended parents. Keep one for yourself. And I think sometimes it can be daunting, especially nowadays when we're all used to typing. I am such a believer in notebooks. I have them sitting all over my office, with notes wherever I go, because sitting and jotting a few notes is such a powerful experience. And I think we get thrown by thinking we have to write a massive note. You don't. Sometimes a line or two, it can just be such a powerful experience of acknowledging what you are feeling. Don't push it away. Acknowledge it, because the more we acknowledge it, the more it gets a chance to retreat from here to there. Go
Right.
away? No. It resides in your heart always. But trust me, it is replaced.
Excellent. My next question is from an intended mom who, um, due to religious, I'm just trying to get a sense of where she's going with this. Due to religious reasons, they are afraid to tell anyone about working with an egg donor, and they would like your advice if it is okay to keep this secret, and how do you keep this secret if you are choosing to keep it a secret?
Okay. And if it's about egg donation, it's challenging to keep it a secret, but I honor where people come from, because, again, we all have cultural, religious differences, and I can't say this is what you have to do. That's not fair. I don't live in your world and I don't live in your shoes. So, what I like to say, I mean, the truth of the matter is, and as you will be counseled by egg helpers, we can never say 100% that anonymous will always be anonymous. We can tell you that egg helpers will never tell, the clinics will never tell, but that doesn't mean that someday a child is not going to find out through another means. You know, when I went to school, we pricked our finger to find our blood types. Who we don't do that anymore, but who doesn't know that someday in the future people may be just doing genetic testing in high school biology class because you can. I don't know. I won't be around to know, but someday that may be happening. And you have to always be prepared for the unexpected, that the child may find out anyway. We all know that there's ancestry. We all know there's 23andMe. We know that people can put in, and someone can send you an email and say, I'm your second cousin twice removed, whatever that means. I never understood that. But so what I always suggest is that I honor where people are coming from, but I like to make two strong suggestions: that even if you do not plan on telling your child right now, or potentially whatever, ever, I'm going to ask you to think of at least two things that you do tell. First of all, always let your child know how much mommy and daddy, or daddy and daddy, well, it's a mommy and daddy situation, that mom, in this of not telling, because dads have to say the egg came from someplace. So, but at least let the child know you were so wanted. Let that be a message from the get-go. You were so wanted. And the second part I want you to add is, and mommy and daddy went to talk to the doctor, and the doctor helped us to make you. Now, nowadays, we know that at least 15%, if not more, couples have issues with fertility. Going to a fertility doctor, going to a doctor is not a big deal. It's not saying you used a donor. It's not saying you did IVF. All it's saying is we had help. And the reason I suggest these two strategies is that if you wind up not telling your child and they do find out in the future, you can go back and you can say, you know how we always talked about that the doctor helped us? Now we're ready to explain more. But at least you've set the seeds, you've set the platform. You haven't just sprung on a total You've let the child know that they were always wanted so much that we went to a doctor to help us. And at least that's a compromise.
Absolutely. The next question comes from intended parents who have a cousin willing to be their surrogate.
Mm-hmm.
The issue is the cousin has never had children, and the clinic they are working with is unsure if that's a good idea.
You know,
And it's a tricky one. So if you want to just not answer it, that's okay too.
well, I'm going to answer it in a kind of, it is a tricky question because actually the ethics committee at Create is going to be arguing this point on Monday at our next monthly ethics committee meeting. So, because I can tell you that there are lots of places that are doing them. Our concern, quite frankly, is that you never know what you're going to get, what happens in a pregnancy. And I think the concern, especially if it's a family member, is God forbid, or what happens if something goes awry and this person is going to have difficulties at another time in her own life when she's ready to have a child of her own. And we don't know that. You can say it's just a pregnancy. You know, ask Leah. Her files are filled with women who are using a surrogate because they had one child and something went awry, right?
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
it's something that we are taking at Create incredibly seriously. We know that it is happening. We know that there is nothing illegal in the process. Again, as always, and strong contracts are needed and all of that. Um, but I can't yet because we are going to be really duking that one out on Monday. So come to an
Are you inviting me to this meeting? Is that what I'm hearing here?
always welcome. Honestly, it would be.
And so the follow-up to that question, I wanted to give you one piece at a time. The follow-up to that question is this mom is asking, saying, you know, she hasn't had children and we are interested in traditional surrogacy because it's less expensive. And just as a full disclosure, CFC very rarely works with traditional surrogates. We find that legally and for many reasons, intended parents who come to us are looking for a gestational surrogate. But Jan, if you can talk about traditional surrogacy and maybe if clinics are, if you're seeing that as a trend.
I wouldn't say that I'm seeing it as a trend, to be honest. I
Okay.
always, and again, I've been doing this for over 30 years now. There have always been the occasional traditional surrogates. Um, I think this has to be tread really carefully, and I am going to stress the need. This is an area that you need really strong counseling and not just a 1 hour runoff.
Right.
This is where not only does the surrogate need to be seen, the traditional surrogate, and the family and the intended parents, but this also constitutes sessions that you're going to work together. There are a lot of issues that could potentially arise. And I have to say potentially because you don't know. None of us are fortune tellers. But we do know that over the years, there have been issues that come up. And we want to, in the final analysis, to me, the most important piece of this equation that doesn't have a voice right this moment is the child.
Absolutely.
And we have to be looking and taking very seriously what is the impact of the child? How will this be explained? Will it be explained? And, you know, what happens? And as much as there are your own factors, and believe me, I always say I'm the working girl. I understand the monetary constraints. I really do. But also keep firmly in mind, keep asking yourself, what will this mean to a child? How will we talk about this? What could be the implications? Never forget that as much as you want to have a child, the child didn't have the choice of being born. So we have a full responsibility. As I always say, two things. It's not enough to just love your child. Really important. You have to love your child to pieces, and you have to protect your child. And protect doesn't just mean making sure they don't touch a hot stove, it means protecting them psychologically, emotionally. It means watching out for their well being.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I have two other questions for you. But first, I want to know what book, actually, this is one of the questions, but what book would you recommend people who are considering surrogacy and egg donation read, and who writes that book?
Do you mean children's books or adult books?
They didn't say. So I'd love a recommendation of both.
Well, first of all, we know all this classic books for children, and I think you give some of those
Yes,
periodically.
The Kangaroo Pouch is a great one. Broken Crayons is a great one.
The Very Kind Koala. My Mom is a Surrogate. That's one.
Yes.
And then the book, by the way, that every person should own, which is What Makes a Kid.
Oh,
What
okay.
Makes a Baby, which is a brilliant, brilliant book written by Corey Silverberg, who just happens to be Canadian. Yay. But he's getting worldwide attention for his books because this book talks about every child coming from three parts. It takes a part from a woman. You need an egg. You need an egg. Whoops, there we go.
Oh.
Egg. Because the egg tells the story of the person.
Oh.
And you
I've
need
never seen this book.
Oh my God, he's brilliant. And then you need a sperm.
Oh God. Okay.
Because the sperm also tells the story. And then you need a uterus.
Okay. Awesome.
It talks about it as parts, as opposed to mommy and daddy loved each other very much, and you make a bit. First of all, that doesn't reflect our changing in culture, because daddy and daddy can love each other all you want. It ain't happening that way.
Right. Absolutely.
But it divides up and it talks about that. And Corey, just for older, Corey has another book out. Excuse me, sorry, I'm just escaping, which is brilliant, which is for a little bit older kid, which is called, Sex. And it is brilliant. He was written up in the New York Times Sunday magazine, an article on this Canadian guy writing about sex education. In terms of the work, psychologists, Susan Gollenbach, Dr. Susan Gollenbach out of the UK has done a lot of work of following children born through technology.
Okay.
Lots of work if you want. She publishes lots of articles. She has been doing a longitudinal study, asking kids, talking to kids about it. I think the kids are now either 28 or even older. That's how many years she's been following them, asking them questions. And then there's Rosanna Hertz, who is a sociologist, who is now talking about kinship relationships. Because a big thing that we are all wondering about is that lots of our donor conceived children have diblings, donor siblings. And what does that look like? You guys, we have changed the face of what makes a family. And as I always say, you have all forged roads that you never expected you would take. And you're challenging senses of what is normal, because we all know there is no such thing anymore as a normal family. Everyone's family is normal. Everyone's family. But it's nice to know and nice to explore. And you are the ones that are creating these new paths.
Absolutely. Thank you. Those are all great suggestions. My last question is, can you make a suggestion how we would talk to, how we would talk to our rabbi, and you might not know this. The question is, how would we talk to our rabbi? And then how would we ensure our child is Jewish if we have a surrogate and a donor? That might be outside of your thing, but I know religious.
Silverman.
I know, but I'm just saying, for everyone watching, Jan is Jewish. I did not ask that question. It was sent to me. And, there are many religious values and beliefs around that. But this particular question, if you know the answer, it would be great.
And again, as in any religious set, for every answer, every question, there are always multiple answers.
Okay.
I will mention that it used to be fairly clear that if the gestational carrier was Jewish and she came from if the child came from a Jewish body, the child was considered Jewish. But there have been now, discussions around that, which is always going to arise. And it is harder to find a Jewish gestational carrier. There aren't that many of them.
Yes.
What I'd like to suggest is that the same thing with, anything, children can be converted. That is so not an issue. And there is also the PUAH Institute, which is PUAH, the PUAH Institute, which discusses all things law, Jewish law, regarding.
Oh, okay.
So the PUAH Institute. But again, I just need to stress that by nature of any group, you're never going to get everyone agreeing on everything, but it is a starting point.
Absolutely.
But it can be, I promise that all the kids that are born through the boys, it's done through circumcision, mikvah, through girls, there are mikvah, there's protocols in place, and we do it, and the kids are considered of the faith. And that applies to other religious groups as well.
Absolutely. I will say I was a gestational carrier like a million years ago, and right before COVID, went to my first surrogate child's bar mitzvah, and it was amazing. It was the fanciest non-wedding party I have ever been to in my life. And his parents are Jewish. I am not, and he is Jewish. So, and it was really interesting for me to sort of watch the beauty of another religion. And I will say that as surrogates, we are fascinated by your faith, your culture, your part of the world. It is like a look into somewhere or a religion or people of origin that we have not met so often in our lives. So it really was absolutely beautiful. Jan, I could talk to you all day, as you know, and I cannot wait to talk to you all day one of these days. Thank you so much for being with us. And we are going to bring Rachel on now.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you again.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Next, we have Rachel West from Embry West. I was going to say West Embry, from Embry West. Rachel is a lawyer in Calgary, Alberta. I'm going to let her introduce herself. She is an absolute go-to for us. She is a French English speaker and works with many of our clients that are working with a surrogate in Quebec, as Quebec is now a recognized place for surrogacy. Rachel, I'm going to leave the screen, but I want to sort of prompt you with tell us about the law in Canada. Tell us about people coming from other places to Canada. Let's talk about Quebec. Let's talk about egg donation contracts. And then maybe your top 5 things to consider legally: egg donation contract, surrogate contract. I'm going to take myself off before I just keep talking. So.
Oh my goodness, I'm writing all of these notes frantically about what you want to talk about. And I'm lamenting the fact that I am coming on after Jan, who is so fantastic and has so many interesting things to show us and talk about. And I must say that I have a second vote for What Makes a Baby book. I purchased that a long time ago for my kids, but also to talk about what I do as a legal practice. And it is a fantastic book. So that's my farewell to Jan, who I absolutely adore. I will introduce myself really briefly. My name is Rachel West. Bonjour à tous les clients ou les parents d'intention en français ou qui nous visitent en France. Je peux parler en français, mais je vais continuer en anglais maintenant. So just saying hello to our French clients. So my name is Rachel West. I'm a surrogacy and fertility lawyer who practices in Calgary, Alberta, here in Canada. I have a legal practice with my law partner, Ellen Embry. Together, we have been doing this for quite some time. I think Ellen is approaching almost 20 years of this. And I'm a little bit newer to the practice. I've been doing it for about 10 years now. So I'm delighted to be here. We love doing webinars and sharing as much information as we can about surrogacy and fertility in Canada. So I wrote down some of your questions. I will give you sort of a general overview of the law in Canada with respect to surrogacy, egg donation, fertility law. I'm going to give you a very general summary. If you ever need a more detailed explanation or you have more detailed questions, I would always be happy to do an intro call with you at no cost to give you sort of those more specific answers to questions that you might have. So, the first thing to know about the law in Canada is that it is a federally regulated jurisdiction. This means that the law of Canada applies equally or ubiquitously across Canada with respect to the legality of surrogacy and egg donation, embryo donation, sperm donation. So, the government of Canada says that it is legal and also regulates the laws here in Canada. So, that means that surrogacy and egg donation or other donations are government regulated, particularly with respect to what clinics need to be doing and also reimbursable expenses. And that is one key difference between Canada and some other jurisdictions that have surrogacy and fertility. Canada is a jurisdiction where you cannot be paid to be a surrogate or a donor. It is an altruistic system only, meaning that you are only entitled, if you are a donor or a surrogate, to seek reimbursable expenses related to the surrogacy journey. So Health Canada puts out a list, a very clear and detailed list with respect to the categories of expenses that can be reimbursed and the backup documentation that is required. So for international clients who are sort of new to this whole world and may feel a little insecure coming into this new journey, please know that the Government of Canada is very cautious about how they regulate that process and that system. From a legal perspective, when we are looking at the laws in Canada or the process, that is the legal process for surrogacy and donation, we normally will think of a surrogacy journey in 3 steps. So step 1 of the process from a legal perspective, there are many, many more steps if you're talking about agencies and clinics and things like that. But from a legal perspective, step 1 would be to draft a legal agreement with your egg donor. Step 2 is drafting the legal agreement with your surrogate. And then step 3 is what is the process after your baby is born? So how do we get you the birth certificate with your names on it? How do we get you a court order if you need that for your home country to obtain citizenship or to obtain parentage rights in your home country? So those are our 3 steps. Leah, did you want me to go into more detail about those 3 steps? I'd be happy to do so, but I don't want to sort of overwhelm everyone with information. Okay, Leah's not responding, so I'm going to just dive right in. So for Leah had asked about sort of top 5 things, but there are certainly key pieces of information or key protections that we want to see in place in each one of those steps of the process. So normally with step 1, you are going to find a match with your egg donor, and she will pass screening, and then we will be drafting a legal agreement with your donor. When we are drafting that legal agreement, we're looking for 4 key things that we want to see in that egg donor agreement. Number 1, that you are the only parents of your child or children that come as a result of the donation. Okay, the donor does not have parental rights. Number 2, that your donor is accepting any risk associated with the donation. This is a big concern for a lot of intended parents, and so we want to make sure that you're covered there. Number 3, the flow of information or communication between you and your donor. Even in an anonymous donation, we still want to put provisions in the agreement that make it clear that you have the ability to ask more medical or genetic information about your donor as the years go by, if you need that for your health, for the health of your baby. And then finally, reimbursable expenses, because as I said, that is something that is very important here in Canada, is making sure that we are following the rules on reimbursable expenses. For step 2, All those same topics will be in the surrogacy agreement, but we will also talk about things like how is she going to take care of her body? Is she allowed to travel? What happens in worst case scenarios if you want to request an abortion or if there is a loss? How are we going to manage that together? And how are you going to manage that with your surrogate? So those are the types of topics that we will address in the surrogacy agreement. For step 3 of the process, what happens after the birth? For the majority of international parents, that step 3, baby is born, now what? For the majority of international parents, that is a 3-step process again. So baby will be born. Often we will seek a court order stating that you are the parents of the child according to Canadian law, and that the surrogate is not a parent. It's not always necessary, but often for international clients, they prefer that. Then we will obtain a birth certificate. Here in Canada, in most provinces, with the exception of Quebec, we can obtain a birth certificate with both of the intended parents' names on it, and the surrogate's name will not appear on the birth certificate. So you will have a birth certificate that says that you are the only parents of your child. And then finally, number 3, a passport, because your baby is going to be a Canadian citizen by virtue of being born in Canada. And so usually our international intended parents will use that Canadian passport to travel home to their home jurisdiction. So those are the 3 steps. Your other questions, Quebec. Leah, you had asked me to touch briefly on Quebec and why Quebec is a little bit different. Quebec has what's called a civil code that is different from the rules and the laws that we have in the other provinces of Canada. That makes Quebec a little bit different as far as how we get parents on the birth certificate and what we are allowed to put on the birth certificate. So if your child were born in Quebec, only one intended parent would be able to be on the birth certificate. So the surrogate's name would not appear on the birth certificate, but there would be only one parent listed as of the current status of the law in Quebec. Top 5 tips for the legal process. It's a really good question, and my answer changes from time to time. But my number 1 tip would be expect sort of bumps along the road. If you are expecting a perfect process throughout this whole journey, it happens. We've seen perfect, amazing processes with no bumps in the road, but bumps in the road are really normal. And so if you're expecting it at the beginning, you're not surprised when a little bump comes up. Generally, it's really important. This is another tip. Tip number 2 is to be really communicative. So communicate a lot with your agency, with your lawyers, with your clinic, anyone that's representing you so that they know if something is coming up. Don't wait to tell us if there's a problem. Don't wait to tell us if there's a concern, because usually the earlier in the process that we know about a potential hiccup, the more easily we can assist in resolving it and just smoothing any bumps out in the road. Other tips. Other tips would be to make sure that when you are in the matching process, you are very honest about what you are looking for and who you are. It's really important that you find a match, a true match with a surrogate or a donor, particularly if it is a known donor that feels good and feels right. Make sure that you really think about what you want and be honest about what you want. Don't sort of pretend that something is acceptable to you if it is not, particularly when it comes to key topics like religion or abortion, things like that. It's really important to be honest and open. That will help you find a far more honest and better match. Trying to think of other tips. I usually only have 3, so I will leave it there for now, unless there are other questions. I'm going to look at the questions on the comments here, and if Leah wants to pop on and ask me anything else, that would be great. So I see a question about most common bumps in the road to expect. What can go wrong, and what are the most frequent problems? Leah, if you want to join me on that one,
Yep.
because I think we see different ones. You and I see different bumps. I'm brought into the process at a different point in time. And so often the bumps that I will see are my clients are very excited because they've found a match, and then maybe something just didn't feel right in the process, and maybe the surrogate decided not to proceed with them, or didn't pass screening. So those are things that can happen. It's really, really rare, but it does happen. And in those situations, lean on your agency, lean on your lawyers, and we're there to help you if that happens. I would say that the most common bumps are just maybe a little bit of miscommunication, either during the negotiation phase or during the actual pregnancy. And that's where communication is so key between you and your surrogate. Do you have any sort of other observations, Leah?
Absolutely. I think that as you are negotiating the legal agreement, we see intended parents disconnect from their surrogate and often are nervous about communicating with her about what's going on in the contract. And so surrogates will reach out to us and say, my intended parents have shut me out while we're doing this contract. Is it something I've done? And so we really encourage people to continue communicating, allow the lawyers to do their job, and to ensure, as intended parents, as I said at the beginning, that the agreements you've made with yourself or with your partner around termination or um, around commitments you're up for and commitments you aren't up for. It's really important that that's communicated in the legal agreement. I mean, there are definitely pieces around the relationship that that can't be contemplated in a legal contract. However, your values around termination, your values around what that relationship might look like in terms of updates around the pregnancy. Well, we can put lots of things into contracts. Practically speaking, your agency will help advocate for you as intended parents around what that actually will look like, whether it's, as long as you are getting the information, whether it's through your surrogate or through the agency. I think that really, you know, really is the key. I know there was a question earlier, and I want to address it with you,
Yeah.
Rachel. But I also want to chime in on it around termination and what happens if we ask our surrogate to terminate and she says no. I want to sort of talk about the exciting, or not exciting, the good news in Canada is that I haven't seen that happen, and the bad news in Canada is that I haven't seen that happen. So I really don't know. And I will say that we find that surrogates are up for honoring their commitment, whether it is whatever it is, the commitment that they make. And Rachel, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about, practically speaking, what the Canadian values are around termination of a pregnancy, surrogate or otherwise.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. As you know, this is a topic that is near and dear to me. So, first of all, starting into a process, a surrogacy process in Canada, understand what the laws are with respect to abortion in Canada. So, a woman in Canada has 100% autonomy to determine what happens with her body. There is nothing we can put into a contract that changes that. So, this is a really key topic to make sure you are aligned on when you are looking at profiles. Okay. Please never say to yourself, oh, I'm sure we can convince her to change her mind on something. We don't ever want to see that. We want to see matches based on aligned values on these really key topics. So, number one, be aware your surrogate can determine what is going to happen as far as an abortion. In the agreement, so we will check on that both at the profile stage, and the agencies are very, very good at zeroing in on that right away. We will also check on that at the contract stage to make sure that you are aligned. And our provisions, or the parts of the agreement that address abortion, are very detailed and talk about every possible permutation that may happen in that scenario. So it's really important to be honest and communicate. And Leah, I did want to touch on something that you said earlier with respect to sort of continuing to communicate with your surrogate during the negotiation process. Please do that. So many times we have heard from surrogates or independent or intended parents that they felt like everything was great in the relationship. Things felt really sort of warm and they felt really aligned. And then as soon as the lawyers got involved, things sort of got cold or really clinical. And the lawyers are not trying to insert that negative feeling into the process. We're trying really hard to do our job and protect both sides of the arrangements. I'm protecting my client, the other lawyer is protecting their client. But it's really important that you maintain that contact. And ultimately, we're going to get to the final point where everybody is happy with the agreement. But please do sort of really choose a lawyer who is mindful of maintaining that relationship during the negotiation process. And also for you and your partner, if you have one, work hard to maintain that warmth, even though we're having that clinical negotiation.
Absolutely. My next question is, will you, if we have a surrogate, if we work with you and we have a surrogate in Ontario, can you do the contract and the after the baby comes part?
So yes and no. So as I said, you'll remember that the law in Canada applies equally across all of the provinces in Canada. So we can assist with egg donation agreement, surrogacy agreement, no problem, no matter where your surrogate is, no matter where you are, and no matter where we are. For the post-birth process, we will usually introduce you to one of our colleagues, one of our amazing colleagues. We all know each other very well across Canada, who will physically be there for any post-birth parentage process. The reason we don't take that over, we could potentially do that for our clients in provinces outside of Alberta, but the reason is I really want my clients to have somebody who can be physically present if necessary. Often it's not necessary at all, but I just want to make sure that that coverage is there. And so normally what will happen is if we work with you on the donation agreement and we work with you on the surrogacy agreement, we will remain in the background and work with you throughout that pregnancy to make sure that you're comfortable, all of your legal questions are answered, and then we will assist the lawyer in the province where your baby is being born in setting them up for success and still supporting you and answering any questions that you have. But our preference is that they do that physical work that requires some physical presence.
Okay, and then the follow-up question to that is, how do intended parents know if they can travel home on the Canadian passport or if they need to go to the consulate if they're located outside of Canada? Like a consulate in Canada if they're located outside of Canada.
For something else. Okay. So typically the answer is going to be based on your country of residence. So it's a harder question to answer as a generality. Look into your country's entry requirements. Can someone with a Canadian passport enter your country without a visa, without any other sort of travel documents? Canadians can travel a lot of different countries without additional documents, thank goodness. And so we find that the majority of our clients can return home with a Canadian passport and don't have to do any additional consulate process here in Canada. But there are certainly situations or jurisdictions where we have for sure seen clients that prefer to go through that whole process while they remain in Canada, dealing with the consulate in Canada. So it really depends on your country of residence.
Okay. Next question is, how long will we be in Canada after our baby is born?
Great question. The answer is about 3 to 4 weeks, sometimes 5 weeks if depending on the jurisdiction, but the majority of births in Canada, you will remain in Canada 3 to 4 weeks. That is the process or the length of time to get a court order, a birth certificate, and a Canadian passport for your baby so that you can return home.
Excellent. Okay, someone is asking if it is true that you can have 4 parents listed on a birth certificate. Sorry, I'm reading in the comments, but Rachel, can you read? I need glasses, so I apologize, Rachel. If you could read the questions, that'd be great.
I've got mine. I've got my progressive.
Also, the question from Adrian around bed rest would be great if you could answer that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so the one question here is it true you can have 4 parents listed on the birth certificate in Canada? The answer is in some provinces, yes. So there are provinces here in Canada where we can list 4, potentially more if we had a court order. But yeah, that is possible. Here in Canada, culturally, we are really proud of our early adoption of new social policies, new social approaches to things, understanding that people are people, and that culturally here in Canada, we want to welcome all types of families, all types of people. And so recognizing polyamorous relationships that may result in parentage is one of those steps that Canadians have taken. And I think I'm really proud of that. I think you are too, Leah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Adrian, your question. So Leah mentioned previously that bed rest can lead to expenses for the intended parents to help cover costs when she, I think you mean the surrogate, can't work. Are these in addition to the standard and capped reimbursable expenses? The answer is usually yes. So the way I think about expenses, or the way I sort of mentally divide them in my brain, is capped expenses typically deal with normal, predictable, everyday expenses, things that we will expect to see in every single surrogacy. Outside expenses tend to deal with things that are less predictable. We don't want to ask your surrogate to take the risk of knowing whether or not she is going to be on bed rest, or knowing how many transfers she's going to have to do. And so for that reason, things that are less predictable or less controllable tend to be outside the capped amount. But please do not take that to mean that it's sort of just a free for all. We are very, very cautious in the way that we draft those expenses. We create small caps for the amounts, and a lot of clarity goes into the agreement about bed rest, because we know that it is a big issue of stress for intended parents. So we try to create as much clarity as possible and as much balance between the surrogate's needs and your interests.
And I want to add that the agency that you work with, whether CFC or another surrogacy agency, will have a Rachel, what is the form called? Like a bed rest form that outlines every detail. Can she drive her kids to school? Can she be up to cook? What the extent
Call
of
it an LRF, legal referral form. Is
on
that
the
what
legal
you mean?
referral form, all of that is there, and then she's going to have to take that to her doctor and have her doctor fill that out. And I can assure you that no doctor is just filling out a form. They are going to assess her health, and they are then going to tick the boxes of what she can and can't do, so that the agency is is reimbursing appropriately based on that need. Often in a contract, you will see bed rest expenses to a maximum of, and that often contemplates hospitalization and a complete removal from her home, which is very different. Yeah, which is very different than modified duties at work. The inability to work and care for her family. So all of that really should be, in my view, managed by the agency. So again, you can insulate the relationship with your surrogate and know that you're protected by your contract, and know that your agency has your back and your surrogate's back, and really looks at what is reasonable, what is fair, and how to distribute the funds to your surrogate, how to help your surrogate apply for employment insurance or any sort of insurances available through her employer. All of that is really important. And definitely to Justin's question about bumps in the road, it's not always pre-contract. It is often post-contract, and it is really important to work with a lawyer who is going to stay connected with you. And not that I want to talk about something that goes wrong, and I am going to talk about something that goes wrong. Surrogate goes for screening, everything is great. Results come back that she has a complex medical issue that she needs to address, whether it is, and these are situations that have happened to us in this year. They found a lump in her breast. She's unable to move forward. They found polyps in her cervix that are so great that they can't repair them enough for her to participate as a surrogate. And at that point, you have likely paid your lawyer. Contract might be done. You've paid your agency for the surrogate, for the coordination of the surrogate, because you can't pay an agency for matching. You have paid the clinic some money. All of this money has gone. And Rachel, I'm wondering from the legal side, how do people balance that? Like, do lawyers charge an extra cost? how do you go after the surrogate for the money back? Like, from a legal perspective, how does this all work?
It's a great question. And as we said, it does not come up all that often. But when it does, it's critically important that you feel supported. So every lawyer is going to be a little bit different in how they handle, hey, I've already drafted an agreement for you, and now the match has fallen apart. I can speak with certainty about me and my partner, Ellen. We will do a second agreement for you with your new surrogate for free. The reason is that we do not want to profit from your misfortune. And so that is a business decision that Ellen and I made together a long time ago, that if we draft an agreement, we're all ready to go, everybody is excited, and something happens before you get to transfer, we will draft that second agreement at no cost to you. We cannot control the other lawyer's costs, so you may have to pay your new surrogate's lawyer's costs. But often the lawyers in this area are going to
We
try
will
and help you out.
negotiate. We will
Yeah,
call
and I mean,
favor. We will
I'm
call in
happy to
favor.
yeah, that's right. I'm happy to call the other lawyer and say, hey, so these guys have just had a really rough time. Is there anything that you can do to reduce those fees? And we're all working in that regard, agencies, lawyers, all of us. Just sort of in those bed rest protections, Leah, I just wanted to talk about, there's sort of probably 4 layers of protection on bed rest. The first one being the profile. So when you look at the profile of your potential surrogate, you'll see a lot of information in there that can help you sort of assess what it might look like on bed rest. And that is super that the agency gives you that much detail at the front end. After that profile and after you've had a match, then your surrogate's lawyer will actually sit down with them again and go through that stuff and imagine if you were on bed rest, what are you going to need? And they will sort of certify the original information that was provided by the surrogate about what she needs on bed rest, or make changes if there are some. So before you even get to contract, your surrogate has looked at her bed rest needs at least twice. Then you've got the contract, which obviously
I just want to add, and provided a pay stub, hopefully, to the
Yes.
agency that you work with. Often that is forwarded to the lawyer to review any benefits, are you paying union dues? Are you, like, it's a whole calculation that is beyond me and really works well when surrogacy is done correctly.
It really does, because at that point, okay, here's the wage loss, but I also know that my surrogate has short-term disability, which is going to reduce that wage loss by 66%. I know that she has employment insurance, which is going to reduce it a further amount. Her wage loss may look big, but I may end up paying nothing. And so all of that analysis is done during that process. And then we also have the doctor and the Health Canada protections in place. A surrogate cannot claim bed rest or wage loss expenses unless a doctor has filled out a form explaining why it is not possible for her to do those tasks. So this isn't just a one-liner on a prescription pad that says surrogate can't work. It is a full form that asks a number of questions, as Leah has said. And then finally, there's always sort of the additional possibility of having conversations with your surrogate, finding supports that she may have not thought of that you can maybe assist her with over that process. If you look at it as being a team, including your agency and your lawyers, we really do everything that we can to protect against that one big fear that intended parents have. Interesting question. Is it okay if I just read these out, Leah?
Yes, I also have one question for you.
Okay, so one question, and I get this a lot, is are you legally responsible for the surrogate post-birth? Is this in the contract?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good question.
And I always say I would be a really bad lawyer if that was not addressed in the agreement. So yes, it is absolutely addressed in the agreement that there is a limitation on the period of time that you are responsible. And really it's a recovery period of usually 6 weeks that you are responsible. If something bad happens, you'll remember I said one of those 4 key topics in the contract was risk. If something really bad happens, there are other insurances in place. And also your surrogate has acknowledged that this is a medical procedure and has taken on some of that risk herself. But that is absolutely addressed in the agreement.
Absolutely. And the next question is, about insurance, we suggest everyone speak to Virginia at Art Risk. You can Google Art Risk Insurance. They shop. They're an insurance agent. They shop, they sell, they educate, they empower intended parents around insurance for their baby. Surrogate is covered if she's a Canadian. The baby is not going to meet the residency requirement in Canada. Therefore, they are not covered. And so insurance is required as well. Life insurance for your surrogate is required. I mean, listen, I've been doing this 17 years, knock on wood, life insurance has never been needed. And it's important to really show up for your surrogate and ensure that you are protecting her family. And and we can do both, right? We can protect her family and we can protect your investment. And so the way in which Art Risk has set up this life insurance policy is that the first $100,000 goes to the intended parents, and the remaining 400, as most policies are, 500,000 goes to the surrogate's family. And so you are, as Rachel said, how do we protect against risk, or how do we, sort of play the slots on balance risk? We pick a clinic maybe that has a guaranteed program. So we know if we don't get pregnant and have a baby, we get our money back. We select a surrogate who has been screened by our fertility clinic. We pick an egg donor that meets the clinic's criteria. So maybe not our sister, because she wouldn't qualify for a guaranteed program. We purchase insurance to cover that expense. If something happened to our surrogate, we have insurance for our baby. NICU care in Canada is $15,000 a day per baby. Rachel and I have seen it, where people have done sort of independent journeys or have been outside. A good clinic will require proof. A great agency will not move forward without proof of insurance. It is so, so important. So my other question, Rachel, is
Leah, can I interrupt for 1 second on each
please
side?
do.
I think culturally there seems to be a disconnect between international intended parents and Canadians, and I just want to hit on what may be a misunderstanding internationally about insurance brokers like Art Risk. I think a lot of people think that they have to pay the insurance broker to do that process with them. It's really important that you know two things about Art Risk and insurance brokers. Number one, you do not pay them. So it does not cost you anything more to go with a broker. Number two, we're looping back on insurance here, but insurance brokers are insured to give you the best advice about the insurance, and they have ethical obligations to their clients. So it's really important to understand that Art Risk and brokers have an obligation to give you the best advice, and they're not charging you for that advice. So really, really want to encourage you to reach out to brokers and work with them to place insurance.
Absolutely. The other question is, if a surrogate has a miscarriage and decides not to move forward, or if our transfers are unsuccessful and she doesn't move forward, are we obligated? Is she obligated to move forward? Is that in the contract?
Well, yes. So there are circumstances under which a surrogate can decide not to move forward, and there are circumstances under which she can decide not to move forward, and there are consequences. So I think we want to be really, really clear here. There is no world in which we can force someone to undergo a transfer if they are not consenting to it. Never going to happen. But what we do is we try to put into the agreement what happens in each of those scenarios. So we will always have a carve out that says that if the surrogate is receiving medical advice that she cannot continue with further transfers, she is absolutely not obligated to continue, and there are no consequences for her in the agreement. Other provisions will say if she just changes her mind and decides not to proceed, then she may have to repay some parts of what you have paid to get to that point. But it's really important to understand that she has final say about what happens with her body.
Excellent. Thank you. That is all of the questions that I have from people. I'll give everyone one last chance to put their questions in, although when we send out the recording, Rachel's information will be there. Also, you'll be getting an email from Rachel thanking you for attending and offering you a consultation. I don't see any other questions. So thank you so much, Rachel, for joining us. I'm going to give everybody just a moment's break before we bring on our next guest. So thank you so much, Rachel.
Thank you, everyone. It has been a pleasure to chat with you today, Leah.
You too. Hi.
Hello, hello.
Hello.
This is like a reunion, and you guys are wearing the same shirt.
We're
which is
matching.
Yeah, we were just taking pictures before, and I'm like, hey, we match.
yeah. So listen, I mean, I don't even know how to introduce you guys correctly, but for everyone that's watching, you know, you can talk about the legal process, you can talk about, you know, all of these other pieces. And I think that when you speak to an intended parent, they speak your language, they understand your fears, they understand your concerns. And so we're going to speak to Rachel first. And I would love for you maybe to talk about, you know, where you live, how you found Canada as a destination, and, you know, a bit about your background, because I know you had kids before, and, you know, like all that. Just tell us everything.
Okay. So basically, how we started off was I was married previously. I had 2 children, and I got remarried, like happens a lot these days. And my husband didn't have any children. I actually went to the doctors for a chest infection, very random, and the doctor had been to a seminar on surrogacy. And they started talking to me about it, and I said, no, I've already got 2 children, that's fine. Shelved. I was obviously unwell at the time, so, you know, put the pamphlet in the pantry, never thought anything about it. And about 6 months later, for some reason, I was cleaning out my cupboard and found the actual brochure, and I started Googling it. And there was an expo of surrogacy coming to Australia. So my husband and I, we live in Gippsland in Traralgon, which is basically 2 hours from Melbourne in the city. So we're very country, lots of cows and animals. And we often go to the football, which is obviously a men's game. We pretended we were going to the football and actually flew out of Melbourne and caught a flight for an hour and a half to Sydney. And we attended the seminar for 2 days. So it was like an expo, walked around, obviously looked at everyone, chatted to different countries. We were very overwhelmed and thought, oh my God, this is like, something we'd never, ever imagined. Got to the Canadian stand and actually met Leah in person, and they were lovely. Broke it down, made it very simple, spoke in our language. It wasn't all, you know, come to us, sign this piece of paper. We had lots of questions, and there was quite a few staff there with Leah as well, helping us out. So we chatted to them. Obviously, Leah knew that I had lots and lots of questions, so she took us out for breakfast the next morning because I didn't want them to leave yet. And went through the rest of the questions we had. We got back on the plane again, pretended we hadn't even left the state, flew back home again with our show bags and our information, just started talking backwards and forwards with Canada. The reason why my husband and I felt so good about Canada as well was not only was the amazing people, and I thought that it was nice that the language, you know, you guys speak English, you're on the same kind of healthcare system as us. So I felt really confident that knowing I'd been a mum before and how much gets involved in relation to birth, all that sort of thing, what happens to bubs after it's born. It was also my husband was very strong on the fact that so far we still are in the same Commonwealth with the Queen until we maybe defect. So it made us feel really safe knowing that we were protected by the Commonwealth, and that helped us legally as well get that little bit edgy forward. So so we decided to sign up with CFC. We then kind of signed it and then thought, oh my God, this is real. It's actually happening. We went off and I had some eggs already frozen, and we created some embryos, and then we started talking, and then we started trying to find a surrogate, obviously through Leah. We found one person we got matched to, and we only got matched to her for about 2 days. And I didn't quite feel, even after the first conversation, I think as a woman, you just know whether you're going to be friends or not. I think as a woman,
is important. This is the piece that every intended parent needs to listen to. Trust your friggin' gut. You have mother's
Absolutely.
intuition before you were a mother. I know, Rachel, you were a mother already, but
Yes.
trust your gut. If the match is not the match, dump the match. Sorry, I'm just gonna like
No,
interject
I
with you
totally
sometimes,
agree.
but yeah.
Even not as a mother, if you wouldn't have coffee or you wouldn't be Facebook friends with her, or if you just don't have enough in common, it's not going to work. It's not a 5-minute transaction. You're going to be, potentially it's a year to 2 years, just even if you don't see her after that, it all ends. So you need to be able to have that. And if you're going to see someone, you're going to talk to them, you just have that match. So immediately we panicked and we said we didn't really, we weren't getting along quite the same reasons. I just wasn't feeling good about it. CFC, you guys were amazing. You're like, don't worry. I kind of cried and thought, oh my God, I've gone back to the bottom of the pile. But that's not the case at all. We started getting matched and we saw Sarah's profile. And immediately we chatted to her, and instantly it was like we knew each other. We were chatting. We had a lot in common. It was easy. We didn't have to, write anything down on, oh my goodness, what are we going to say? I think you instantly know when you're going to be friends with somebody before you even talk about the baby stuff. So, we met up with Sarah. We immediately loved her. We were hoping that she loved us back. That's the hardest part, hoping that we love each other back. And and obviously we were both happy, and we moved forward. So that's kind of how it started in relation to that. So we did keep it a secret from our families. My husband didn't have any children, so we didn't want his family to get excited because they knew I couldn't carry children. My children were in primary school at the time, and I didn't want them to be, it's very overwhelming to explain to them they could have a sibling, they might not have a sibling. So only my husband and I knew. So we kept it a secret up until literally Sarah was pregnant. So, and then we announced it to both families. So not even our parents knew. It was very much a journey that we had together because it was less pressure. I didn't want people asking me. Some people are opposite. I've met lots of couples and done lots of guest speaking where people are like, I needed my friends and family, and I totally understand that. But I already had children, and I had this thing where I didn't want people to be like, well, there's other people that have never had children. So, why are you taking the services up? Or I don't know, I had these doubts on what would happen. So I did keep it a secret. Looking back now, I don't know why I was worried. The whole entire town was like rallying around, and we had the biggest baby shower, I think, known to man. So but yeah, so everyone's journey is different, but that's how we did ours. And so it was quite a lot of shock when Sarah was pregnant. We announced it. Journey wise, it's obviously a little bit, like it never runs as smoothly as you wish it was. And we're in Australia, Sarah's in Canada. So we had time differences. We talked as much as we could, which I think we did pretty good. We both love talking a little bit. So that always makes it easier. I'd already had children. So for Sarah, I did know what she was going through to that extent. I think it was important to know that, that I couldn't control anything over here. I trusted Sarah. We were friends before it happened. Before she started carrying the baby, we knew each other. So you've got that relationship before the transfer, which means that, you've kind of, each other. So you know what each other needs, if you need space, if you don't need space. But our journey wasn't bad. We had an embryo that we lost, and obviously that was really tough. And Sarah can talk about that from her perspective. From mine, it was terrible to be on the other side of the world. And, I was at work, and I was actually on my lunch break when it happened. I was buying vacuum cleaner bags, which doesn't sound very exciting at all. But I remember getting that call of being inside that shop and bursting into tears. And it was hard because Sarah was getting rushed to hospital. Sorry, you can see Logan. He's coming. You want to say a quick hi? Say hi, Sarah. And that was really hard because all I wanted to do was jump on a plane and come over. And we just needed Sarah to have the best possible, healthcare. All I wanted to know was that she was okay, that we contacted Mike, and, obviously
this
Mike
a
was there.
miscarriage, Rachel?
That's
is that
right.
what you're talking about? Okay, so
Yeah.
you guys, Sarah got pregnant. I mean, I know the story, but got pregnant, had a loss. And then how did you pick yourself up after that? Like, how did you go, maybe it's Sarah, maybe it's my embryos. Should I do this again? Like,
absolutely.
How did you grieve and get moving? Because you knew time is, on the clock.
Absolutely. From my perspective, it was really hard because I thought, oh, maybe it's because, this is not meant to be. You have all those weird emotions as a mother. Maybe I've already got 2 kids and that's the reason why this is not working. Also, my heart just went out for Sarah because, the surrogate's trying to do everything they can to make your changed life. And I probably was grieving more for her, to be honest, than I was for me. And I was wanting to be with her because, she was going through it emotionally where I was so far away, but I was upset and hurt, but I just wanted to hug her. Like I just wanted to be there for her. My husband probably took it a lot harder than what I did. He hasn't got any children, obviously, so he doesn't really know the process. And obviously going through surrogacy for the first time and not even having someone that's given birth around you was obviously very daunting. And explaining to him the situation of what Sarah had to go through during the miscarriage was, he was quite upset in relation to that. I was obviously devastated, but trying to figure out how I could help Sarah. That was my biggest aim, is to make the surrogate feel like it wasn't her fault, because it could have been anything, like it was just one of those things.
And then as you got to the pregnancy that was successful, how did you stay connected? Like, did you talk to her doctor? Were you at the birth? Like, how did you really stay close? And then Sarah, I'm going to move to you to talk about giving advice to intended parents of how to be good intended parents. So start thinking about that.
I thought it was amazing. I thought that you guys over there in the clinic we went through, we had cameras. We talked to Sarah before and after, it happened, and it was just an amazing process. The doctors were amazing. We would get up my time 3 o'clock in the morning and be talking to doctors who would be laughing with us and being lovely. I mean, the adrenaline alone, the 3 o'clock in the morning meant nothing to us. We were up and running around the house, excited to talk to doctors and nurses, etc. So we watched the transfer take place live, which was an unbelievable change, and it felt like you were actually there. So we spoke to Sarah and we spoke to the doctors as it was all happening, and it made you feel very connected. And even over on the other side of the world, I felt like I truly was in the room at the time. So that was a huge experience for me to be a part of, and just seeing our name up on the screen, showing it was our embryo, etc., will never be something we'll never forget. Still gives me tingles now because it was a huge thing to watch it happen. So that part was amazing as well. So it felt very, very much a part of it. And Sarah and I spoke a lot. We got on extremely well as well, which always helped. I knew what it was kind of like to be pregnant, so kind of that part was easy in relation to how is she feeling. Is she feeling unwell at the start, what's happening, etc. But on a whole, I didn't have any real, I think I was a pretty good intended parent. I didn't I think a mother's intuition, a surrogate's there to help you carry a child. I don't think you need to over doctor what she eats and drinks and sleeps, and I think she's in there to do it for a reason, and I think she's there as a female to help another female out, and I don't think that I needed to say anything. She was always amazing and always chatted to me about things, and sometimes we'd be like, we won't say how I'm feeling. The next day I'm like, I need to tell you something. She's like, me too. So it's amazing on, thinking you're holding back on something, but both of you feeling the same way. So our journey was really lovely. And I will say that not just because I'm on camera, but it really was. And it's to this day, we still text and talk to each other. And a lot of times I'll send her pictures of Logan before I put it on social media as well. And Logan and I, we talk about Sarah all the time at home. I've made it quite open to him. He knows he's born in Canada. He still wears Canadian clothes and things to kinder. We just got his passport renewed because he's 5 now. So he's still a dual citizen.
Okay. And what, Sarah, I'll go back to you and then I'll come back to you, Rachel. Sarah, in terms of, if you could talk about sort of why you became a surrogate, what it was all about, and just sort of share I know you've done it a few times now, but if you could share a little bit about your experience as a surrogate and how you were able to connect with Rachel and stay connected, given that she was so far away, and why you chose an international couple.
Yeah, for sure. So definitely gonna touch on all of those things. I have done it a few times, but Rachel was my first, her and her husband were my first intended parents. So they were definitely the learning experience with me. I was very lucky that it went extremely smoothly. So really quick backstory, the reason I became a surrogate, I had a really close friend who struggled for years to get pregnant, who asked me to be a surrogate for her. I was just starting the process of kind of looking into it, like seeing if I could get cleared to do something like that, and she got pregnant. So it kind of rolled around in the back of my head for a really long time until pieces kind of fit together for me. And then I happened to see a posting about an info night with some staff of CFC, so learned about surrogacy and kind of jumped on board from there. I think I always knew I wanted an international intended parent. Every surrogate is going to be indifferent in that regard. I think it has a lot to do with like what you're looking for in a relationship, in terms of boundaries, in terms of what you're comfortable with distance wise. Some people want intended parents that are really close by. I think for me in my first surrogacy, I was looking for the distance and the ability to like, you know, separate. Now that Rachel and I are so close, I kind of regret that she's so far away. I have been lucky enough to see them a few times, but and then in regards to like a lot of the things Rachel touched on about the intro between the intended parents and the surrogate is where I think I will probably spend the most time kind of talking here. All the things Rachel talked about in regards to like it being easy, that's not always true, but you can prepare yourself like talking to your surrogate and being open and honest about what it is you actually want from the relationship and what she actually wants. Those are the most important things. So going into it with an idea of what you're hoping for. However, that could completely change. I think we both said, "Oh, we'll talk once in a while," and we ended up talking every day. So you'll grow with the relationship, and that might change. But I think being really open and honest about what you're hoping for in terms of communication, like I might not know exactly how much, but I know I want to talk to you a lot, or I don't know exactly how much, but I do have a really busy life and I won't be able to talk to you all the time. And then like what parts of that communication are important for you? Like it's really important for me as the intended parent to hear from you like really quickly after an appointment, or we can set up a call end of the week, like just those kinds of, it really helps with like trying to avoid as many of those bumps that you guys were talking about earlier as possible. And one of the most important things I think that really helped us is right at the beginning of our relationship, we had a conversation about hard subjects and how we were going to deal with those things. So because we knew like we're trying to be practical about the fact that everything might not go really well, they had a limited number of embryos. There was like a lot of things to think about. So we had a lot of conversations about if something happens, like a failed transfer or a loss, do you want to hear that from the doctor? Do you want to hear that from me as the surrogate? And like for them, are you comfortable with telling us that? Like, are you going to be okay to talk to us, or do you need the doctor to get involved, or the agency? Or so we did go through, and Rachel, she brushes over everything because the baby at the end makes everything worth it, right? But we had a failed transfer, we had a miscarriage, and they had an embryo that didn't make it through thaw. So Logan was literally their last embryo. So it was.
Sorry.
So
He can see you on the screen.
Yeah, it's okay. So it was like very much like we went into, and in the last transfer, I didn't know going in it was the last transfer, which I think in the end was probably good. That would have been a lot of pressure to know it was the last embryo, but like that, keeping that communication open with your surrogate and for the surrogate with your IPs about how can I show up for you in a way that's going to make you feel trust in me and me to trust you, because like Rachel said, we don't want to be micromanaged what we're eating. We don't want to be, but we want you to trust us. We want to be able to trust you, and like setting the expectations at the beginning, I think is a huge part of that. I feel like I probably didn't answer all your questions, Leah.
No, I think it's great. And
That's
listen, what Rachel's expectations and what Sarah's expectations are might be totally different. You might be a very shy person, and your agency needs to know if you are shy and if you aren't up for communicating because the trauma or because the language or because whatever the reason, so that they can match you or we can match you accordingly. We can find a surrogate that shares not only termination values but also type of contact, because the type of contact can be lots, can be little, can be a language barrier, so it's through Google Translate, which I want to tell you, if English is not your first language, you will have the most beautiful intentional conversations because there's no small talk. It has to be very clear. And Justin has a question, Sarah, and I think you can answer it. It says, oh my gosh, I need to get glasses.
I can read it.
Thank you. Thank you.
So there's a couple. There was one about preference to communicate at the start after the intro. I feel like Gareth, maybe I kind of addressed that. I think you just have to be really honest with each other. Like honestly, me and Rachel, we both use Facebook Messenger a lot, so it worked out. But like WhatsApp is what I used with other sets of intended parents. Like most people are flexible. If you're like, this is really my preference, I tend to go here. You know, just talk about that. Even at the very beginning, just say, this is where I tend to default in terms of my communication. In terms of what surrogates look for in an IP, that is the hardest question to answer. It is literally like, I don't know, because, and how I met Rachel actually really speaks to that, because I came into this thinking I wanted one thing. I asked for profiles of a certain type of intended parent. I went through many. I was probably annoying as a surrogate because I was like, I love all of these people. I want to help them all, but like none of them are the people. And then I changed my criteria a little. I was like, you know what, maybe like, I feel like these people, probably a lot of people don't look at their profile. Can I see those? I saw Rachel immediate. And then I was like, these are the people, like introduce me. And within a few minutes of the call starting, I could tell and I've had a broken match as well. It was after Rachel and Craig during my second journey. So I can speak to that. Sometimes you just know right from the start. That one was hard for me because I felt I wanted to help them. I didn't feel the connection.
I don't remember that. That's so weird. Okay.
They ended up leaving the program. They came back later. I actually took their surrogate to her medical appointments, which was really very strange. But I knew from the beginning that wasn't a good match for me, and I should have trusted that instinct. And I'm really glad that in the end, it didn't move forward for other reasons, and it protected everybody from that. But I do think, like, in terms of answering what a surrogate is looking for in terms of an intended parent, I can't tell you exactly, but I can tell you that if you're just yourself in your profile, in your video, in your introduction, then the right person is going to find you.
The only thing I will say on that is we have a lot of clients from very specific regions in the world. And so if you are two guys from France, we get it. You like wine, you like cooking, you like gardening, you travel to the south in the summer. Cool. Surprise. We want to know who you are, and when a surrogate selects someone else, it's not that they're not selecting you. They're just selecting someone else. And setting yourselves apart from people, sharing vulnerably, leaning into the pain with hope. So, we had 5 failed adoptions. It was really sad. And we are still hopeful, because while everybody likes the underdog and a sad story, they want to know that they are not, going to be dragged down, like that you are hopeful, you're excited, you're ready to move forward. And, whether you have children, as Rachel did previously, I know the surrogate I'm looking for someone with 3 or more kids. Sarah has 3 kids, understands siblings and understands that deep relationship of siblings. And whether there's 10 years age difference, whether there's 5 years age difference, I think that's a really important piece. And I think Sarah would definitely agree with that for sure.
I agree. There was things in Rachel and Craig's profile. I think that was part of it. And I guess I don't think about these things sometimes until you hear someone else kind of say it. But there were things in Rachel's profile, and I think I have said this before, but like I read her profile and she spoke to me as my husband, like reading about her interests and then her husband, like it was kind of like her and they were me and Mike were her and him, but flipped on the other side of the world. Like, so it was there was like a lot of things she talked about, like being really into being crafty with her hands and using tools and like all of that kind of stuff. So absolutely, like what is it about you that makes you specifically, that's like your passions, your interests that are going to be unique or fairly unique to you?
Absolutely. And Rachel, I want to ask, like you leave Canada, you get home, you've got this kid. Like, how was it to sort of go to a doctor's appointment and have the doctor say, oh, okay, so tell me about your baby's birth. And you're like, like, how do you navigate once you have this kid? Surprise, like the Lion King, here's this baby. what do you do with that? How do you manage that? So, because the people that are listening, like, yes, everyone that's listening, you're, surrogacy works. You will be a parent if you hang in, lean into the discomfort or the mismatch or the failed unsuccessful transfers, the miscarriage. If you lean into all of the things, we're going to get you there. But once we do, that's when the real for intended parents seems to start. So Rachel, tell us about that.
Absolutely. I think the weirdest part is flying to Canada with 2 people and flying home with 3 people. It is very strange. You kind of feel like you're stealing something. I will be honest with you. That's an honest answer. Getting on the plane and, at the time Logan was 14 days old, I think he was at the time when we flew back. The airlines was lovely, which is always helpful. But yeah, it's a very surreal feeling. We come in into Sydney, which is one of our international airports, and even showing his Canadian passport was a huge deal. And I think the customs guy just thought it was a regular day, and we're sort of like walking through, like, look what we've got, look what we've got. He's just there stamping the form, thinking, oh.
So they didn't ask you. They didn't say, where did this baby come from?
Didn't.
What's going on?
He did say he looked very new and he was a new addition to the family. I think they actually thought that I'd given birth in Canada, maybe on a holiday or something.
Okay.
I think that's just
because
what
your
they
name was
originally
on
thought.
your name was on
Correct.
the
Correct.
Okay.
So my husband and I showed our passports. Logan had his passport. We all had the same surname. So I think to the poor guy at customs who was just doing his normal job, thought that I'd just given birth on holidays. And that was an exciting experience, driving home and then walking through the front door. And it's very surreal for the intended parent, because obviously Sarah's recovering from childbirth, and being that I've had children before, that takes some time, and things that you go through process mentally and physically, where we wake up the next morning and we're holding a baby, and we've slept reasonably well the night before, due to excitement, probably not as well as most people, but on a whole, my body's okay. Like, there's nothing that I've done. My husband and I are feeling great. We haven't had that back pain and all those sort of things. So very surreal feeling of coming back to Australia. Walking through the front door was strange. Everyone's very excited, and any intended parent, I'm sure, will tell you that your family and friends are just so excited that it's all come to an end, the journey, and finally you've brought the baby home. Doctors do give you some weird looks. From my point of view in Australia, probably the weirdest part was that I tried to go to what we call our maternal health centre, which is going to get the baby weighed in. And because we didn't have any documentation, we had to have a gorgeous lady take us through the back door on her lunch break to weigh Logan in, because we had no paperwork yet. So it was that was probably the weirdest thing. Until he had, we have what we call a Medicare card in Australia. So it was a little green card to say he's got his own healthcare. And his name hadn't been printed on it yet. So no, we still get some comments. Some people still ask me. We've been very blessed that Logan hasn't had any health issues really, but we've taken him to the hospital once when he got a bump on the head at kindergarten, and they said, "Did you have a natural birth?" And I was thinking, how long have you got?
Yeah. Let me tell you about that. Yeah.
No, on a whole, we chose from day one to be honest with Logan straight away and tell him. We do live in a country town, so it's very, people are very aware of what happened. I didn't want anyone to walk up and talk to him and say, your mum didn't, have you in your tummy. So we often, Sarah and Mike have spoken about in our house regularly. And we have photos of Sarah on our fridge, and we talk about her like that's Sarah carried me in her tummy, and mummy and daddy loved me and brought me back. So I think everyone's different on how they want to do it. But I thought in this day and age with social media, we can't wait for Logan to be able to, get a social media page and be able to connect with Sarah by himself as well, without that as well. Because
I've seen her Facebook. I don't know if you it's my own, little
Have you seen her Facebook?
Oh no, I haven't. Okay. Touche.
So no, so I want to. It's everyone's different on how they want to do it, but Sarah, and we've made Sarah very much a part of our day-to-day living. And on every form that I fill out, I say he was born in Canada, and if Sarah's name has to go on the form, then they don't know who she is, but I put her name on the form, and I'm very open and honest with it. I think it makes it easier for me personally, but everyone's different.
And Sarah, going, like the journey ended, you recovered. Have you seen Rachel and Craig? Have you seen them since? I mean, I know the answer, but for everybody else.
Yes. So I am lucky enough to have become a staff member of CFC while I was in my first surrogacy. And that also allowed me to attend a conference not long after Logan was born in Australia. So I was able to see him 5 months after he was born. And I stayed at Rachel and Craig's. So after the conference, I went to or before, I can't remember, before. I went there to see them. And then they came and spoke at the conference, actually. And then again, I went to Australia for a conference and got to see them. And they're supposed to be coming here soon.
Hopefully the end of the year. Hopefully the end of the year.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So yeah, so they're gonna come visit, and we're gonna show Logan snow. So
He's very excited.
yeah. So we've been lucky enough to really like stay very close. That doesn't necessarily mean that's the only successful way to do it. I have other intended parents, still love them to death, not as close. We don't talk as often, and both of those things are fine. It just depends on the relationship and what you're looking for. And even me at being a surrogate for two different sets of intended parents and thinking I would want the same from both relationships, I didn't, and it feels fine. Both of them feel fine, like they're both good relationships. So yeah, I've been lucky enough to see them even though they live halfway across the world.
Okay, so I have a few questions, Sarah, for you from people. And the first one is, sorry, I'm like telling you, I'm freaking blind. Did you pump milk for the intended parents or for yourself? And what would you have felt if your intended parents had asked you to do that? We are considering surrogacy, and I will be unable to produce milk, but would love to have breast milk.
Yeah. So every surrogate is different in regards to that.
Okay.
Most of us are willing to put it up. Most of us put it on our profile. If we
Okay.
don't, though, if you feel like the relationship is good enough to ask, just ask her. Just say, this is something we were wondering if is on the table for you. If you're not, you do have people who can help you. Your agency will help you broach that question. If you don't feel comfortable asking, or you feel like you're going to be putting pressure on your surrogate. I've had mixed experiences with that. With Logan, we hadn't really we kind of planned to pump, and then he had low blood sugar when he was born, and the nurse was like, "Can you breastfeed him?" And I kind of looked at Rachel and she was like, "Go ahead." So that conversation kind of happened in the moment. And then because of my experiences with pumping, I actually don't have a lot of success with my intended parents in the second couple journeys. I broached it with them. I said, I think this will make it easier for me if we I'd love to pump for you if we can be successful. And then I actually ended up doing breastfeeding with both of those babies to help with pumping as well. That's a level maybe a lot of intended parents aren't comfortable with. And it might be something your surrogate wants to ask you because it can really help her with pumping that she might be worried about asking you. So those questions that are uncomfortable come definitely on both sides. If it's something you're really, really wanting or hoping your surrogate will do for you, it doesn't hurt to give out that information as early as possible because it might be something they change their mind about too. So.
Absolutely. And as for us at CFC or other agencies, there are often surrogates in various communities that have pumped and the intended parents have chosen a formula. And so they have an excess of milk, and, there's sort of milk sharing, and there's milk banks in Canada is very, very open. So please check with your agency around that conversation. I think it's a really important one. I've been a surrogate twice. Both of my intended parents would not have been comfortable with me breastfeeding, did not want me to pump. I mean, this was nearly 20 years ago, and I was totally fine with that. So I think, as Sarah said, it really is an individual thing. My next question, Sarah, and I think this is for both of you. Did you talk about money together in terms of what the expenses were? Did you have that conversation together, or was that something left to the lawyer's agency? Like, who does that part?
Rachel, you can definitely speak to your memory on this, but I feel like the only time we talked about money was at the very beginning when we said we didn't want to talk about money.
Yeah, we made a rule. So we thought that was a legal thing, and we did all of that, and then that book was closed. So for us, that was a...
yeah, and for me, I think I heard Ellen and Leah talking about this earlier, and the insulating of your relationship away from the finance conversation. I think it is probably one of the most important things I could share with you. Most of the time when I see things that don't maybe help the relationship or foster trust between intended parents and surrogates, it's usually money. It's usually a miscommunication. So I would just, as much as possible in your beginning conversations, you say we do contracts carefully, being open and honest with your lawyers about everything. Try to make sure you address everything. That's what they're there for. They will, if you miss something in your contracts, they'll usually tell you, you might want to consider this or you might want to consider that. And then outside of that, leave it to the finance department and really try hard not to talk about finances. I can't say there will never be an exception to that conversation. But generally speaking, I think that the advice you got earlier about really separating those two things is really important.
And
And
I
then this
100% agree with that. Yeah, like from my perspective, I think as an intended parent, you're already asking, the surrogate to carry a child. That to me was two completely different topics. And once the contracts were signed, you get a good lawyer, you trust the lawyer, you're happy with it. Once it's signed, to Craig and I, that was like a closed book situation. That was done. So
and
I think you got enough things to worry about.
absolutely. And Rachel, this question's for you. And if you don't want to answer, it's totally fine. The person is asking, did you have to have all of the money up front and how did you afford this?
Okay. Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
So, no, that's okay. So I actually bought my first house when I was 18. So I was lucky enough to have some equity in my house. It was strange going into the bank and asking them for money when they didn't think it was a renovation or a refinance, and they had to tick the other box, which is a bit weird.
Okay.
I said I'd like a baby, just tick other. So I did have enough equity, but no, it's not at any one time. Craig become an absolute pro at getting up at 3 and 2 o'clock in the morning and checking the Australian dollar against the Canadian dollar.
Yes. Yes. That is the best hint. Okay. Pin that. You are an international intended parent.
Absolutely.
We've
Absolutely.
had
No matter
people
where you're
tell us
from.
they've saved like 10 grand
Oh,
by doing
absolutely.
the dollar. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that was massive for us. That was huge for us. So we become very quick in understanding the Australian dollar versus your dollar over there. But no, not at all. We did the process over, we froze the eggs, paid for that. We paid for them to go over on a plane, which is a completely different, amount of money. Then we paid for them to be frozen. And then we paid. So we had it in probably 4 or 5 increments that we did it for. So there's definitely not walking in with, a bag full of cash and saying, here we go. At any time, you can slow the process down if you haven't got the funds. We were lucky enough that we'd done a lot of homework prior to it, and I think any intended parent shouldn't race to the start if you haven't done that background with that money and finances, because that would be gut-wrenching to not have enough to finish the journey. So we made sure that we'd had enough organised for the amount of embryos we had, and as much as we could, budget for in relation to things maybe going wrong or taking longer. But I think, again, the same kind of thing as we said before, having the finances a closed book. We knew our amount of money. Our solicitor and everyone knew the amount of money we had. We were very open in relation to that with the CFC. The accounts department, we knew everything. And again, closed book. There's the money. Spend it as need be.
And we find for a lot of intended parents, as you said, slow it down. And so
yes,
she's saying slow it down, she doesn't mean the pregnancy, because that's just going to happen. But create your embryos.
Yes.
Get the egg donor; those are frozen. Then find a surrogate. Then lawyer. Then and move at a pace you can afford. Because a lot of times we talk to intended parents and we say to them, or I always say, it's like they're so excited, and so we're like, no, like let's slow down. Like you're gonna have to come to Canada. You're gonna have to stay here. Like, it's expensive. Like, where are you going to stay? What are you going to do? And having those conversations with your agency, whether it's CFC, whether it's another agency, really talking all of the sort of what ifs through, so that you can confidently get on a plane for a month and a half, however long you're coming to Canada, and go, okay, I can work remotely so I can continue to work. Or I have to go to the government and say, I'm having a baby in another country, which some people can do, and get coverage, or many people outside of Canada that work for US or multinational organizations have family building money built into their HR policy. Check that out. All of those pieces are so important. And I think just, really, like Rachel said, doing that homework, is so important. So thank you for that. Rachel, Sarah, any last advice? Anyone have any last questions? We've all been hanging in there for 3 hours. Like, I'm shocked we still have everybody listening. It's fantastic. So any last advice, Sarah, for intended parents, or Rachel for intended parents?
I would just say, yeah, honestly, do your homework in relation to it. I think expectations and being honest. You don't talk about the money honestly with your partner. It's no point bringing a baby back if you come back broke. I think things like
Diapers
that.
are
There's no
expensive.
Exactly right. It's not going to be cheap the day that you hit the tarmac and get off the plane. So I think being open and honest with your partner as well, with both intended parents being on the same page, I think is really important. And then also being honest with your surrogate. Being sometimes they're hard conversations, sometimes they're not. But I think to make the journey as great as it can be, definitely agree. Close the finances off at the start, get the contract finished, and make it easy for your surrogate. It's whether they're 5 minutes up the road or 20 hours on a plane. They're doing this for a reason. They're there for you. They wouldn't have signed up if they weren't going to. Micromanaging them and making them do things that they may not want to do, I don't think is helpful. And I think relaxing and enjoying the process. Like, we had a lot of fun. We had photos a monthly from Sarah with her belly, and we made fun.
Oh
We had fun of it.
yeah.
Yeah, we had my baby shower had Sarah's photos for all the 9 months worth of photos on it, and you make it as an intended parent, you make it as fun as it can be, and that way I felt included, and whether I made myself included, and made sure Sarah was involved in that, and just having the contact and making everyone happy, I think is a huge difference, and yeah, just making sure that you set up and know what's going to happen as best as you can.
I
Absolutely,
agree.
Sarah.
Yeah, I agree with like everything she said, and I think when she talked about in the beginning, um, the fact that she was always trying to make me feel like, I guess, as a surrogate, in terms of like having a good relationship with your intended parents, I think feeling like they trust you, and like that's really important, and being able to believe that they trust you, because if you have to talk to them about something hard, it's easier if you know that it's going to be like you feel safe to do that. And Rachel always did really go out of her way to make me feel special. Even to this day, her social media posts, I always get a picture that's different. Like, I got my own picture. So little things like that, like, they mean a lot to your surrogate. We are usually here. There are exceptions, but we are usually here to like help you, and then we love to be able to see you enjoy your family. So being able to like stay in touch, whether that's minimal or whatever that looks like, if they've asked for that, pictures occasionally, it can mean a lot to us to get them. And I think, like I said at the beginning, like, be yourself, let us know what really makes you you, and your surrogate will find you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, guys, for joining us. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. And we will talk to you soon. Thank you, everyone who hung in, or even if you had to leave and you come back and you watch us on recording. It is such a pleasure to have shared with you today what is my deepest passion in life, other than my own children and my own family, which is egg donation and surrogacy. We will send out this recording. We will also have the providers that were here today send you emails offering you free consultations to talk about the medical side, to talk about the legal side. I looked at my notes and I've missed half the things. So we're going to have many more of these webinars, and I look forward to catching up with you. I look forward to following your journey, whether through CFC and Egg Helpers or through another program, and watching you online become parents. And while I can't promise you that surrogacy is easy, I cannot promise you that it will not come without heartache or pain. I can promise you that the professionals that you choose are really here to sit with you during the process, to show up for you, to care for you, to honor your individual experience as you build your family through egg donation and surrogacy. So thank you so much. And I look forward to hearing from you in the future.